recording this to spare you. Okay, so welcome everybody to Sofia, a beautiful city, to do this ZKProof 7 event from the organization ZKProof.org. I'm Jonathan Roash, Executive Director at ZKProof and CEO of Kedit. And I'm very, very excited to start this event. There's so much that we're going to be learning together in the next few days. I wanted to start with reminding why is ZKProof.org, why does it exist? It's a standardization workshop, but so far we haven't pushed any standard out. So it might be useful to remind ourselves why did the steering committee all the way back in 2018 decide to form this organization. So the mission of ZKProof.org is to create this chain of trust between the mathematics of zero-knowledge proof and then the libraries and everything that is being implemented concretely, and then the applications that are using all of these realized schemes. And the idea is that the end user or users need to be able to trust the technology. This is a very different technology than many others, because if we succeed, then they need to know that the proof that they're getting is indeed proving what needs to be proven, and that you cannot prove something that is not true. But there's very little that a user at the end can do if there's a problem along the way of their zero-knowledge proof software. So realizing that, there's a concrete effort by many practitioners in the space to try to come together and look at zero-knowledge proof at all of the different layers, the mathematics, the libraries, and the applications, and figure out how do we instill trust in this technology. So I talked about the steering committee. We have here Alessandro Chiesa, who's a member of the committee. We have Eran Trommel. We will have Mutu, last name of Mutu, feel here. We will have, do you know how to pronounce the last name of Mutu fully, quickly? Yeah. He knows. Veritis Abraminyam is my attempt. Dan Bonnet, and we're also helped by Ran Canetti, who was in the program committee for this event. We probably will have Yael Kalai joining at the last day, and at the head of the steering committee is Professor Shafi Goldwasser, who's also been helpful with the verifier effort, which we'll talk about later in the event. This committee formed, there's more in the committee, this committee formed with the goal of reviewing what's out there, the 30 years or now 35 years of development in the space, and try to instill trust in the technology. Now, this event, ZKProof 7, is the result of a very generous grant from the Ethereum Foundation. It's a collaboration with Alex Hicks from an effort called ZK-EVM Formal Verification. It's a pretty large effort, and the last day of this event is dedicated to the formal verification of ZK-EVMs. Thanks to this collaboration, we were able to start working on this event already many months ago, and it's, again, the result of a lot of work. Most of the work by Liad from Kedit, you saw her outside, it's practically solo work of Liad on coordinating many different aspects. So huge thank you to Liad, and we will get back also at the end of the event. It's also possible thanks to the sponsors. So we have Ligero, we have Inverse Tech, and we have Starkware. Starkware, first-time sponsors for ZKProof event. And Starkware will present in day 2 how to address zero knowledge in Starkware, in StarkNet, which is a new development. So a pretty intense agenda. I hope you guys agree that there's a lot to go and a lot to learn. It starts with something that is very necessary to instill trust in the technology. You know, sometimes we do have issues and problems. And very recently, we discovered that one of the main techniques for to transform zero-knowledge proofs from interactive to non-interactive, Fiat Shamir had issues. And the moment this was published, we decided that this should be a focus of the first day. So you're going to have a description of the attack on Fiat Shamir, followed by a very recent proposal to solve or potentially solve this attack, and then a conversation with people that actually know what they're talking about, so not me, on how this does the solution solve everything and what really happened with this attack with Fiat Shamir. So going into the details, we'll have a fireside chat by Michele Oru, who will dive deeper into the topic. And then followed by more interesting presentations. When you want to instill trust in the technology, you also need to use all the tools available to reinforce, to review the novelties that are arriving. So for this event, we had 24 accepted papers that we want all to see and learn from. So throughout the next 3 days, you're going to have 24 different talks. And I want to personally thank all of those who submitted and got accepted. Also, those who didn't get accepted, I thank. And they made a very genuine effort to pass the message of their papers in 20 minutes, 20 to 25, and 5 minutes of questions. And it's going to be the challenge of all of us to understand what they're saying, but also if you think there's a question that will clarify things, don't be shy, ask, and you shall be answered. But then when 30 minutes are over, we do have to move to the next speaker. This is how this event will allow all of those papers to shine. So the success of that, of these presentations also comes from us being a little bit harsh on the time. Apologies in advance to all of you speakers, and thank you again for being here. We will have on day 2 a short reminder of why are we using zero-knowledge proofs, so the applications. There's a focus on identity, a little bit on stable coins with privacy, and a whole session on TLS notarization, which we believe is one of the killer apps of zero-knowledge proof. So we invited a keynote from Brave, the browser. Brave has about 100 million users, and they're working on adding TLS notarization as a gesture in the browser. So they will present what it means. And finally, as I alluded, the third day is focused on security and making sure that the zero-knowledge proof that we're deploying is trustworthy. And the topmost technique that is available other than peer review and this conversation is systematically proving the software correctness with formal methods. And so the third day is dedicated to the application of formal methods to zero-knowledge proofs, a focus on ZK EVMs, and a little zoom on the verifier part of zero-knowledge proof schemes with the verified verifier. So a lot to go through. Again, I want to thank all of you for coming to this conference. There is a tiny bit of logistics, not a lot. The first thing is I discovered this entering the room. You saw the yellow step at the entrance. If you step and fall on it, -1 point to you. Don't do it, please. Thank you. Second point of logistics, you got a little card, so a game, a word game, each of you received. There is a word that is secret to only you. When we're going to go to it, you will need to enter in conversations with your peers and try to make them say your word. So you need to make them say your word. And if you succeeded, you take their card. And if you succeed in taking all the cards, +1 point to you. I don't know what those points mean. I'm sorry. Okay, day 3, we have a photo, a global photo, where you all do need to be happy and smiling, but also listen to our amazing photographer, Ronen, who's also been with us at ZKProof 5, and I've heard that many people used his photos as Facebook portraits for years after. So make sure that when you're here, you're with your right profile. And last point of logistics, we're going to try something. If you don't have a Blue Sky account, do have a Blue Sky account. Follow zkproof.org, and everything that crosses your mind that's related to zero knowledge, spam zkproof.org, and I believe that we have enough people to have something significant on Blue Sky that might move the needle. Blue Sky, for those who don't know, is the non-evil version of Twitter. If you're a lefty, and it's the just go there. That's it. All right. So this is to again thank all of you for joining. Thank the sponsors. Thank the organizer. A big shout out to Sam Altman and OpenAI for making it possible to have an event with a team of 2.5. Wouldn't be possible otherwise. I know that some of you also presented papers that you wouldn't have presented if Sam wasn't around, or Ilya, or whoever you adore. And with that, we're ready to start the content part of the event. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful event. Let me start off by taking the opportunity to thank John and the rest of the team for organizing such a great event. I want to tell you about this recent work that I had with wonderful collaborators from the Ethereum Foundation, Dimitri and Lev. So I guess I'm supposed to introduce myself. So I'm Ron Rothblum. I'm a professor at the Technion, and this year on sabbatical at Succinct. I'm in the business of proving true stuff. But in this work, we're going to be proving something false. But actually, we'll get to it at the end of the talk. I want to encourage others to also try to prove false stuff. So we'll see. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about Fiat Shamir, which I assume that most, if not all of you, are familiar with. But we'll kind of describe it quickly just to remind ourselves. So it's this amazing work by Amos Fiat and Adi Shamir from the 80s. And in a nutshell, the Fiat Shamir transform is this kind of incredible way to transform interactive protocols into protocols that are non-interactive. And this turns out to be very, very important and remarkable. We'll talk about why. But especially in the context of this conference, the Fiat Shamir transform is a critical component in most, if not all, but almost all snark constructions. So it's very important. I should say that I don't think that Amos and Adi had in mind snarks when they were developing it. So the original transformation was geared around building efficient signature schemes, and it's still used for that. But nowadays, it's being used much, much more broadly. OK, so this is the Fiat Shamir transform. So how does it work? So the Fiat Shamir transform, we start off with an interactive argument system. So there's some protocol for proving correctness of a computation, and it's highly interactive. One catch is that the protocol has to be of the public coin variant, which means that everything that the verifier sends are just random coin tosses. Okay, so we have an interactive protocol here on the left-hand side. So the prover sends some messages we'll denote by alpha, and the verifier responds with messages which we'll denote by beta. And again, the betas are necessarily just random coin tosses. And if you think, the fact that we're restricting to these public coin protocols in which the verifier only sends random coins, turns out that the actual interactive protocols that we care about are of this form. So that's why we're going to be focusing on them. The idea in the Fiat Shamir transform, again, is to transform these interactive protocols to be non-interactive. And the key idea, loosely speaking, is basically to replace the verifier with a hash function. So we're going to be using the hash function h. And we're trying to emulate the interactive protocol. So the prover can generate its first message, alpha 1, easy peasy, no problem. Now it's sort of supposed to wait for the message from the verifier. Instead of, we don't want interaction, so it cannot wait for it. Instead, we'll derive this message by hashing the prover's message, alpha 1. And we'll basically hash everything else that we can. Okay, so x is some statement on which we're proving correctness. So we also include x in the hash. Now that we know what beta 1 is, we can generate alpha 2, send it over. And now we'll similarly generate beta 2 as a hash of alpha 1 and alpha 2, and so on and so forth. We can keep generating the verifier randomness by just applying the hash function. And overall, we can now send the entire sequence of alphas over to the verifier and run the previous verification algorithm. So it's a very simple transformation. I should say, though, that despite its simplicity, there have been a lot of attacks on Fiat Shamir, and I would say that these are attacks on the implementation. So while it's simple to describe in a slide, it turned out to be quite tricky to do in code. Basically, oftentimes you have different components in your proof system that are sending things over, and it's easy to forget to include some stuff in the hash, and this has led to sort of critical breaks. In contrast, jumping ahead in the talk, the attack that we described today is not against a particular implementation bug. It's really against the transformation as described, and as you sort of were supposed to do it until we realized that it's problematic. Okay? So, Fiat Shamir, extremely influential, extremely important. Just to highlight some reasons, it's incredibly powerful because it seems like interaction buys us a lot. A lot of the protocols that we really, really care about, so things like Fry or SumCheck or GKR, bulletproofs, all of them are highly interactive, and it seems the interaction really, really helps. But on the other hand, interaction is often problematic in practice, and the Fiat Shamir says, hey, you can design these things to be interactive, but then not pay for it, so everything can be non-interactive. So it's extremely powerful. Another thing that's remarkable and doesn't always happen in cryptography is that it's very cheap. It's very practical. All you need is a good hash function. So it's very lightweight, no like fancy public key operations, very lightweight. And it's extremely useful. You know, back in the 80s and 90s, and still today, we're using Fiat Shamir to build efficient signature schemes. It moved on kind of more in the theory literature to build CS proofs, which have sort of evolved into these like snarks and starks and so on. So incredibly powerful. Cool. So it's great. We really like it, and it's really important. The question is kind of that we're focusing on today: does it work? Okay. So is this methodology sound? And I want to start with, you know, just like at the level of intuition, it's very clear why it feels like it should be sound, right? So when you do Fiat Shamir, to generate the message beta 1, the verifier's message, the prover sort of has to decide what alpha 1 is and apply the hash, right? So you have to sort of, it seems like you have to decide what alpha 1 is, and only then you get to know beta 1, which is exactly what happens in the interactive protocol. So it seems to be kind of a good emulation of what happens interactively, making this be reasonable. You know, as cryptographers, we're not so happy with things just being reasonable. We would like something beyond that. And we have this work by Poincheval and Stern from the 90s. What they showed is that if you model the hash function that you use in an idealized way as a random oracle, so basically you choose the function at random from all functions, then this thing provably works. The catch is that we can't actually use totally random hash functions. It's way too expensive to even think about. So the common heuristic is to design the protocol and analyze it in the random oracle model, and indeed, it works for Fiat Shamir. And the common interpretation is, you know, if you started off with a secure interactive protocol, you compiled it using Fiat Shamir, then we know that the resulting protocol is secure in the random oracle model. Now, if you replace the random oracle with a concrete hash function, if there is an attack, it seems like this should indicate a weakness in the hash function, and we should just switch to a different hash. Right? Make sense? Okay, so it's a very natural interpretation, but this interpretation was challenged in a beautiful work about 20 years ago, a paper called The Random Oracle Methodology Revisited. It's by Ran Canetti, Oded Goldreich, and Shai Halevi, who showed the following remarkable fact. So they constructed some particular cryptographic schemes and proved that they are secure in the random oracle model. But what they also showed is that if you take these schemes and replace the random oracle by any hash function, no matter what, the resulting scheme is broken. Okay, so it's definitely not a fault of the specific hash function, because no matter what hash function you use, their scheme is broken. The catch, however, is that specific schemes that they constructed were highly contrived. So what does it mean to be contrived? In particular, it means that they were intentionally designed and built in order to fail in this way. Okay? So this is a beautiful work by CGH, Canetti, Goldreich, and Halevi. A follow-up work by Boaz Barak and by Shafi Goldwasser and Yael Kalai showed that actually things are more worrying. So actually even Fiat Shamir itself is broken in a similar way. So what Yael and Shafi showed was an interactive protocol, so Boaz, an interactive protocol that is secure, it's sound. When you apply Fiat Shamir by Poincheval Stern, the resulting protocol is secure in the random oracle model. But now, for this Fiat Shamir, if you replace the random oracle with any concrete hash function, it's broken. The catch here is that the interactive protocol that you start off with is contrived. Again, it was designed in order to fail. Still, you know, it's kind of getting closer. And a few years ago, together with Bertusek, Bronfman, Holmgren, and Fermi Ma, we showed that actually, for the specific way that we build hash-based snarks, namely take an IOP and compile it using a vector commitment or a Merkle tree, however you want to think of it. Even for that specific thing, which is a very common construction of snarks, we have a similar attack. So even that is broken. What's the catch here? Well, either the IOP or the vector commitment that you use for this result needed to be contrived. Okay, so we still had the contrived component, it was just kind of becoming smaller and smaller. But still, for all of these results, there was some contrived component, which I think was a reason that people were not very worried about this line of work. Okay? And what I want to show you today in this work is that we actually have demonstrated an attack against a particular standard, natural, and popular protocol that is being used in practice. And we show that you can do an attack of this flavor on Fiat Shamir of this protocol. So that's what I'll show you today. What does it mean to attack? I'll say it more precisely, but basically we'll be able to convince the verifier to accept a statement even though the statement is blatantly false. Okay? Cool, so I want to show you the protocol that we attack. In order to do so, I need a tiny bit of background. I'll try to be brief. So we're basically going to need two components. One component is what's known as a polynomial commitment scheme, or PCS. Okay, so I'll explain what that means, specifically of the multilinear kind, but don't worry about it. And the second thing is the GKR protocol. So I want to describe both of them kind of briefly. So let's start off with what is a PCS. So a PCS is basically a way to commit to you have a very, very large polynomial. You can commit to it using a very short hash. And later on, you're able to prove, so you commit to this polynomial P, and later on you can prove statements of like evaluation statements. So P of X is equal to Y. So you can prove these kind of statements using a very short and efficiently verifiable proof. Okay? So thankfully, in this talk, we're just breaking security, so I don't need to define what it actually means for a PCS to be secure. But intuitively, you understand what I mean, right? You hash. You should not be, once you hash, you're intuitively committed to a polynomial, and you cannot open it in different ways. Okay? So that's a PCS. In the talk today, I'm going to be focusing on a multilinear PCS, which basically means that the polynomials that we consider are multivariate polynomials that have degree 1 in each variable. But to be honest, it's not that important. So if you're less familiar with multilinear polynomials, just think of your nice univariate polynomials, and you'll mostly be fine throughout the talk. Okay, so that's a PCS. The second component we need is the GKR protocol. So this is by Yael Kalai, Shafi Goldwasser, and Guy Rothblum, who's also my brother for those who don't know. So the GKR protocol is pretty old by now, so over 15 years old. So it's an interactive proof, which is statistically sound, meaning that secure even against an unbounded cheating prover. And it lets you prove statements of the form C of X is equal to Y, where C is a bounded depth arithmetic circuit. Okay, so we have a bounded depth arithmetic circuit C, and we can prove its evaluation. Something I want to sort of emphasize, in contrast to what we're used to with snarks and so on, here there's no witness in the background. So we're proving C of X is equal to Y. This is in contrast to things you might be more familiar with, which we would like to do, which is, prove that there exists a witness W such that C of XW is equal to Y. And we'll talk more about that later. But for the GKR protocol, we're talking about deterministic computation, just C of X equal to Y. And again, C is a bounded depth arithmetic circuit. We'll denote its depth by D. Okay? So how does the GKR protocol work? Or rather, before how the protocol works, what is a circuit? So a circuit is this graph. So you have a graph. The vertices are labeled by either addition or multiplication gates over some finite field on which we're operating. And my circuit is going from bottom up. So you feed in an input, X, and you evaluate the circuit in a natural way. So there is some wiring. So you have arrows saying what goes where. And you all know how to evaluate a circuit. You just apply the gates. Right? So I didn't draw all the wires, but you do this computation until eventually you get an output Y. Right? And we're thinking about a circuit that has a bounded depth, so the depth is not too large. Right? So that's how you compute the circuit. Now, what the GKR protocol allows you to do is prove that you did this evaluation correctly. So I'm coming along and claiming to you that C of X is equal to a value Y. So these last vertices on the top contain vector Y, let's say, or a string Y. And I want to prove it to you. The way that GKR works is that, in our head, we're going to be thinking of, you evaluate the circuit. Each layer of gates now has an associated value that it got in this evaluation. And we're going to be thinking in our head about taking these values and encoding them in a particular way. So these yellow bars that extend to the right are some particular encoding of the values that we got when we evaluated the circuit. And more specifically, this encoding it will sound complicated, but It's not so complicated, but it's basically taking the values that you see and interpolating them as a multilinear polynomial. This is sometimes known as a multilinear extension. Okay, so this is the values that we see in these yellow bars. Cool, so far we only think of them. We haven't done anything with them. How do you prove, how do you verify? So we start off with the claim that the output layer contains a string y. The first thing that the verifier is going to do is choose a random coordinate in the encoding and compute so there's a claimed output y. We'll compute the value, so the encoding I'll denote by y hat, and we'll compute y hat at position r. Kind of turns out that is something easy that you can do. If you know y, it's easy to compute the encoding at the location r. And something to notice is that if a prover was not nice, like the one that we have today, and was trying to fool you, and it gave an incorrect string y prime, then due to properties of polynomials not liking each other, so polynomials are good error correcting codes and have distance, with high probability, if you start off with a false claim about y, then you will have a false claim about the encoding. Okay, cool, so that's what the verifier did by itself. Now what we'll do is we're going to run some sort of interactive reduction protocol that reduces a claim about the output layer to a similar claim about one layer below it. Okay, so now we get a claim about one layer below it. Now we run this interactive reduction step again, and again, and again, until eventually we get a claim about the input layer. Okay, I'm not going to describe how this interactive reduction protocol works, but it's basically based on the sum check protocol, which you probably heard about. Cool, now that we have a claim about the input layer, recall that the verifier knows the input, so it can compute, similarly to how it computed the encoding of the output, it can compute the encoding of the input. And now just check that the value that it got is correct. So that, at a high level, is the GKR protocol. Okay? The main thing to remember from this entire slide is the random point that we chose in the output layer. Okay. So GKR it's a great protocol, but it's still restricted. As I said before, you can't prove stuff like, I have a witness showing stuff. So if you want to prove, here is a hash value that is a hash of a blockchain that has some particular properties, you cannot do it directly using GKR. Rather, you might want to use this protocol that I want to present. So it's a way to build a succinct argument for what we call non-deterministic computations, basically computations in which there is a witness, with the proof length is going to be much, much, much shorter than the witness size. Okay? And the way we do it is to combine the GKR protocol with our PCS, so the two components that we have. So here's the protocol and how I want you to think of it. So the protocol is actually going to have two phases. So it have an initial sort of setup phase or pre-processing, in which depends only on the circuit that we're talking about and not yet about the input and output. Okay? So what we'll do first in this step is, the verifier is going to tell the prover, hey, Mr. Prover, here is the PCS, the polynomial commitment scheme that we're going to use. So in particular, if it has a key or a salt or something, then that is specified. And next step, they agree on what circuit we're going to be proving stuff. Now you might think, in typical application, it's the verifier that's choosing the circuit, but especially if we want to talk about soundness, then we want soundness even for circuits that are not necessarily chosen by the verifier, so I'm denoting it as the prover chooses the circuit. Okay? So that's sort of a setup phase, and eventually we're going to have an online phase that will depend on the circuit being proved, but the circuit being proved is very, very large. So the verifier doesn't want to keep it entirely, so it's only going to save some sort of digest that describes the circuit. So a good way to think of it is some sort of hash of the circuit topology. Okay, so it says what's the wiring and what gates you have and so on. Okay, so I'll denote this by bracket C. It's a short description or digest of the entire circuit. Cool, so this is the pre-processing step. Now in the online step, we actually have particular input X that we care about and a witness W. How does the prover prove? Well, first of all, it actually performs the computation. It computes and generates Y. And it's going to take the witness W and hash it using the PCS. So it's committing to W as what I like to call it the guts of a multilinear polynomial. Okay? Cool. So we send over, hey, Mr. Verifier, here is the input X, here's the claimed output Y, and here is a hash of the witness. And at this point, the verifier is going to start running the GKR protocol. So remember what was the first step in the GKR protocol? It was choosing a random point in the output encoding. So that's what we'll do. So verifier chooses a random point in the encoding of y and computes this y hat of r. And now we continue in GKR. So we tell the prover, here is the random point r that we chose. And now we start these like interactive reduction steps, one at a time, until eventually we get a claim about the encoding of the input. Now in our case, the input is sort of a concatenation of the actual input x and the witness w. And we have a claim about its encoding. Turns out that it's not hard to decompose this claim into a separate claim about x and a separate claim about w. So that's what we'll do. Now, the claim about x, the verifier can check by herself because she has x. So you can check this by yourself. And regarding w, we don't have w. That's kind of the catch. But thankfully, we have a PCS encoding of w. So using the PCS encoding of w exactly lets us check claims of the form the encoding of w at the point that we have is equal to a value. Okay, does this make sense? So this is going to be the protocol that we're interested in, going to focus on. Yeah. Hey. Go for it.
So the verifier, doesn't it need this multi and add-I functions?
Yeah, so that's hidden inside the digest C. So it's commitments to these functions.
Right, so how is it, it's running the GKR?
Yeah, so internally within GKR, you'll need to evaluate these things, and the prover is going to help you out. All right, so that's how it's done. Does it make sense? So you commit to these functions, right? That's what the digest C is.
So it has a PCS commitment.
Yes, that's also happening there. Or if your circuit is nice enough in which you can compute these things by yourself, that's also fine.
Sorry guys, one technicality. If you have a question, please wait for someone to give you a mic so everyone can hear you guys and also on the streaming.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. So this is the protocol that we're going to be focusing on. I've denoted it by pi, and it depends or parameterized by the PCS what we're using and the depth D of the circuit on which we're running GKR. Okay? So this is a protocol that we're interested in. What happens when you apply fiat shamir? You replace the verifier by a hash function. So let's see what happens. So same thing as before for the pre-processing step, except that now we also sort of need to set up a fiat shamir hash function. So hopefully it has like a key or a salt or something, so you need to specify what it is. So that's H. Now in the online step, as before, run the circuit, get Y, hash the witness, get alpha, send them over to the verifier. At this point, the verifier is supposed to choose this random point in the output encoding, but we're not going to wait for the verifier to toss coins and send them over. Rather, fiat shamir tells us just hash everything you know, right? So rather than choosing R at random, we just hash what we know, which is the circuit digest C, the claimed input, the input X, the claimed output Y, and the hash alpha. Okay, so using that, we derive R. The nice thing about the fiat shamir is that the prover can similarly compute R without any interaction. And now they can start running the actual interactive step of GKR, but also here we'll apply internally fiat shamir. So all of the internal random coin tosses that we didn't talk about so much, but that happen internally in GKR are going to be done using fiat shamir. Eventually we get a claim about the encoding of X and encoding of W. The claim about X you check directly, and the claim about W you do using the PCS evaluation. If your PCS is by itself interactive, you're also doing fiat shamir to that. Okay, so this is what the protocol looks like when you apply fiat shamir to it. And we'll denote it by Fs sub H. H is the fiat shamir hash function of the previous protocol. Okay, so this is the protocol that we want to attack. And this is the notation. Something I want to highlight is that this protocol is popular. It's been used in a bunch of works. I think it was not designed in order to be broken. I think it was designed to be safe. So that's in contrast to the previous contrived works. And it's a very natural one. It's sort of what feels like you should do. So it's been used in a lot of papers. And there are also deployed protocols, in particular, Expander by Polyhedra is a popular one that uses this protocol. Okay, so Expander is a GKR-based proof system. And this is the bug fix, the PR after we notify them of the attack. We'll discuss later on what exactly fix means here. Okay, but again, to emphasize that this is very relevant to actual deployed protocols. Cool, so with that setup, I can state what our results are. So what we show more precisely is the following. So tell me what PCS you use. You choose it. Tell me what Fiat Shamir hash function you use, Poseidon, whatever you want. When you tell me the PCS in H, now for a sufficiently large depth, I can prove a false statement. Okay, so the order of quantifiers is sort of like the depth depends on your choice of PCS and H. What does it mean that you can prove a false statement? So we're breaking what's known as adaptive soundness, which is a very realistic scenario. Essentially what we show is that given, if you tell me what the PCS you're using is and what hash function you're using for Fiat Shamir, I can generate an explicit circuit C star. We're going to see it today. So it's a circuit C star. This circuit actually won't even have an input X. It would only get the witness W. And I'm going to construct some claimed output Y star and a proof pi. And it's going to have two properties. One is that this circuit, no matter what witness you feed into it, it will never, ever, ever output Y star. So the claim that there exists a W so that C star outputs Y star is just false. It's not true. But nevertheless, we're going to be able to convince our verifier that this claim is true, thereby proving a false statement. Okay? Something that people are often ask themselves, I think naturally at this point in the talk, is how weird does the circuit C star look? Have we pushed the contrived aspect into the circuit? Somehow it seems like, given the way I'm presenting it, it seems like that's what's going on. And in a sense, it is what's going on. But in hindsight, I would say that the circuit C star is actually not contrived, and it's very natural. And we'll talk about that more later on. Okay? Okay. Cool. So I'll also mention briefly two extensions of the main result, but really we'll focus on the previous one. Second main result that I'll mention briefly is that even if you're considering some other circuit C, which looks nothing like my circuit C star, we show an extension of that attack. So there's a way to take your favorite circuit C that you're interested in, and I can modify it in a way that will construct a new circuit that computes the exact same functionality as the circuit that you care about. So exact same input-output behavior. But for this new circuit that I've constructed, I can prove anything I want. In particular, today I like to prove false stuff, so I'll do that. I'll go over this briefly. Another thing, we also show variants of our attack that are non-adaptive. So in the sense that we can attack circuits that actually don't depend and don't have inside implementations of the PCS or hash function H. So that's what's known as a non-adaptive attack. We do need to know an upper bound on the sizes of the PCS and hash function H, but nothing beyond that. However, there are some caveats here. The attacks are, for the non-adaptive case, are either less practical or require something non-trivial from your PCS to satisfy, which some PCSs do and some don't. Okay, but this is a version of a non-adaptive attack that we also have. Cool, but today really I want to focus on the first result, which is just showing an explicit circuit for which we can prove something false. Right, so what are we going to do? Again, build a circuit C star, never, ever, ever outputs Y star. Y star, I can already tell you, it's going to be a string of length 2, which is exactly the 0, 0 string. Okay, so Y star from here to the rest of the talk is just a string 0, 0. Okay, so we're going to construct a circuit that never, ever, ever outputs 0, 0, but we'll be able to convince our verifier that it actually sometimes does. Okay. Just to highlight that in this context of an adaptive attack, our circuit C star that we construct, for which we prove this, is allowed to depend on our choice of PCS and hash function H, and indeed it will. Okay, this is an adaptive attack. So what's the idea? At a high level, what we're going to try to do is to have our circuit C star try to predict the Fiat Shamir randomness, and specifically the point R in the output layer that we were talking about before. Okay, once our circuit predicts if it is able to know what's the Fiat-Shamir randomness, the Fiat-Shamir value that's derived for R, that turns out to help you a lot. So that's sort of what we're going to try to do. So we'd like our circuit C star. It gets as input a witness W. It does some stuff. I'm not sure yet what. But eventually, it's going to try to predict what's our Fiat-Shamir randomness. So what is our Fiat-Shamir randomness? Remember this point R. How was it derived? We hashed everything we knew at the time, which is the circuit digest of C star. It's the claimed output Y star, again, just 0, 0, and some hash alpha of some witness. Right, so this is what we are trying for our circuit to derive in order to predict the Fiat-Shamir randomness. This turns out to actually be a problem because in order to write down this circuit, I need to know its digest. Right, so to describe the circuit, I need to already know how the circuit operates, what its digest is. So there's a circularity here, and it's not clear how to do something like this. The way we'll get around the circularity is by having we'll pass along this digest as a witness to the circuit. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So here's the actual circuit for which we mount our attack. So it gets as input a witness W. It's going to sneakily think that this W is actually a digest of its own description, but that's what it thinks. It doesn't have to be the case. So we interpret W as some circuit digest psi. We'll treat, we now kind of sort of follow the honest strategy, which is compute the PCS hash of the witness, W. And now when we try to compute the Fiat-Shamir hash, instead of plugging in like this bracket C star, which we cannot, we plug in psi. We put in Y star, again 0, 0, and this value alpha that we just predicted. This gives us a value gamma, which we're going to treat as a candidate value for R. Okay? And now we do something which will be mysterious at this point. We'll clarify it in a bit. We output the string gamma and gamma minus 1. It shouldn't be clear yet why we do it, but that's what we do. Okay, remember our circuit, or I should say, the circuit is a circuit that always outputs 2 feed elements. And my claim is that it never outputs the value 0, 0. Indeed, this is the next thing I want to claim. The circuit never, ever, ever outputs 0, 0. Do you see why? Well, it always outputs 2 distinct feed elements because you subtracted 1. Okay, so this claim is certainly true, and not hard to prove. The more interesting thing I want to show you is how to produce a proof that would actually convince our verifier to accept this claim. Say, oh, you know what? There is some W that makes the circuit output 0, 0, although we agree that there does not. Right? Okay. So this is what I want to show you. So what does a cheating prover, need to describe what the cheating prover does. So first thing the cheating prover does is need to say, what circuit am I using? Well, we'll use obviously the C star that I just told you about. The next thing I need to do in the attack is tell you, what is the claimed output Y star, 0, 0. And I also need to give you a PCS hash of the witness. So I pass along the PCS of the circuit digest of C star, which now I know. So that's what I do in the first step. At this point, if you think back about the protocol, we start running GKR and do all this stuff. But let's pause here for a moment and think what happens at this point. Okay? So the actual output of the circuit is what, we just saw what the circuit is. It's going to output this gamma minus 1. And I want, which were derived in some way. We'll recall in a second. But just think for a moment about this gamma minus 1. And I want to ask you a simple algebra question. So what is the multilinear extension of a polynomial that, say, at 0 gets the value gamma, and at 1 gets the value gamma minus 1? So you can just think here of actually, because we're talking about a multilinear polynomial, but because the truth table of size 1, it's essentially just a linear function. So the multilinear now is just 1. So take my word for that. And what we're looking for is a linear function that at the point 0 outputs gamma, and at the point 1 outputs gamma minus 1. So what does it output at the point 2? Gamma minus 2, right? It's a line. right? It's a linear function. It's a line. If it's 0, it outputs gamma. At 1, it outputs gamma minus 1. At 2, it outputs gamma minus 2. What is it that output at the point r? Gamma minus r, right? Good. So now let's go back and recall what is gamma and what is r. Well, gamma, we have this construction of the circuit. It's the Fiat-Shamir hash of the circuit digest, y star, and alpha, right? That's how we constructed the circuit. What is r? R was derived by applying Fiat-Shamir. How do we apply Fiat-Shamir? We hash the circuit digest, y star, and alpha. Oh, and they happen to be the same, which tells us that the multilinear extension of the real output of the circuit at the specific point r is equal to 0. So far, so good? Cool. So that's the real output of the circuit. What about the false output, the one that I'm trying to convince you of? So the output 0, 0, what happens with that? So now, another fun algebraic fact. What is the multilinear, or rather linear here, extension of the function that at the point 0 output 0, at the point 1 output 0? What is the output at the point 2? 0. What is the output at the point r? Also 0. It's always 0, right? So what we see here is that the multilinear extensions of both the real output and the fake output of the circuit agree actually on the point r. It's kind of these two functions, the 0 function and the gamma minus r function, or gamma minus x function. So we started off with the false claim that the circuit outputs the value 0, 0. But when we apply this Fiat-Shamir step, we've switched over to a claim which is actually true for the circuit. The claim that this circuit, if you take its extension, the extension of the output, and evaluate it at the point r, you'll see a 0. It's a correct claim. So from here on, now, since we have a correct claim, we can just run the honest prover strategy, right? We can just keep running the GKR honest prover strategy, the honest PCS evaluation proof, and convince our verifier. Right? The key point is that we've shifted over from a false claim to a true claim. And once we are in a true claim, game over. Okay? So just to see pictorially, how does that attack work? Well, the prover specifies the circuit C star. It sends over the claim that the output is 0, 0, and it sends over alpha. This should be PCS of the digest of C star. The verifier, follows Fiat-Shamir. It sets R to be this hash value. And what we just saw is that the claim that it's now trying to verify, the claim is that y star hat at R is equal to 0, is actually true with respect to the true claim. So from here on, we just run the honest GKR protocol and the honest PCS eval, and our verifier accepts always. Okay, so going back to this question, is our circuit C star contrived? At first glance, it seems a little bit weird because it does this like PCS evaluation and it does the Fiat-Shamir hash. And why would someone ever want such a weird circuit? Well, it turns out that we want such circuits. In particular, circuits that evaluate hashes are extremely popular. So for example, if you want to check things like is some value a hash of a database or blockchain or whatever that satisfies a value. Or I think even more concerning, when we apply recursive proof composition, we're inherently trying to prove things about the Fiat-Shamir hash of the outer proof system. Okay, so circuits that contain the Fiat-Shamir hash are actually widely used in practice. So I think this attack is concerning. Okay, so we have this attack, and I mean, it's a problem, and we're going to discuss it more. But what about, we would like for this attack to go away, and it's not clear that it can, but I want to point out kind of two lines of work. So first of all, there's been a lot of work actually in the theory literature, and things I've been involved with also, about showing sort of provably instantiating Fiat-Shamir in the plane model, using explicit hash functions based on nice cryptographic assumptions like LWE, DDH, and so on. So we have a lot of work on this. We've made tremendous progress in recent years. The caveat, though, is that, first of all, what we have so far will not give you full-fledged snarks. You can get very meaningful notions, but not snarks yet. And secondly, they are very far from being practical. In particular, they're using, or much further from being practical as compared to just hash functions, they use machinery like FHE and so on. Still, having said that, we could have had the same criticism about things like zero knowledge years ago and about FHE years ago. So this line of work, I hope it makes progress, and that eventually we'll be able to just prove soundness. Still, we need something for today. So let me mention some mitigations against the attack. So these are ways to change the protocol, let's say, in a way that I don't know how to mount the attack. So a key point, and we'll hear more about it later today, I think both from Elon and when we'll chat. A key point in this attack and all of the contrived attacks before, it's really crucial that the circuit is able to evaluate the Fiat-Shamir hash. Right? And some way to get around this might be to try to make sure that the circuit is unable to evaluate the Fiat-Shamir hash. So mitigation that we suggested in the paper is to increase the depth of the Fiat-Shamir hash function to be larger than the depth of the circuit being proved. And this is this fix that's used by Expander. A second proposal from this really interesting new work by Gal Arnon and Elon will talk about it, I think, immediately after me. Elon will tell you about it more, but they're increasing the size of the hash function. And to make it actually work, they're using a really cool proof of work idea. Elon will tell you more about it, and we'll discuss it. Something interesting is that they also show that their protocol is secure in a new idealized model that they introduce and is sort of geared at sort of capturing these sort of attacks that we have, but it doesn't quite capture all of the attacks. And in particular, for a technical reason, it doesn't capture our attack. But we'll probably talk about that more. So let me just kind of conclude. What we showed in this paper is that actually the random oracle methodology can fail in a practical scenario, which I think is quite concerning. Let me just end with a couple of open questions. So, I think one immediate reaction after seeing this attack is to think of sort of easy fixes which make it not apply. I think it's not hard to do stuff like that. The more interesting thing is, as cryptographers, we're not happy just that there is no attack. We'd like some sort of evidence for security. Elon and Gal have work in this direction, but I'm hoping to see more of that. I also, going back to the beginning of the talk, really encourage you to try to prove false statements. I think, these ideas are kind of new, and I think there's a lot of potential to extend them. So you're very encouraged to do so. A particular challenge, which I think will be, if you can do it, I think it would be very dramatic, is to be able to get around, say, R mitigation. If you can get around R mitigation, you'll be able to break a lot of stuff. So if you can break Fiat-Shamir when the circuit is more shallow than the hash function. And yeah, if you can do practical attacks, attack the GGM. I think I don't have time to go into it. If you're interested, I can tell you more about that as well. So I think I'll end here. I'm not sure if I have time for questions, or we'll keep them for later.
We'll coalesce the questions with the panel.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Start. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks Ron for the great talk. I'm gonna repeat some of the stuff for the people back home joining just for this video. My name is Elon Yogev, and as opposed to the bad news that Ron gave us today, I'm going to try to give us some optimistic good news, and also we will talk about this. Okay, so let me kind of recap the stage that we're at, okay, in maybe simpler terms, okay, without going into particulars of the GKR protocol and stuff like that. So I'm going to be focused on very simple protocols. I call them Sigma protocols, okay? What I mean is just 3 message protocols, and I want them to be public coin. And we're also going to consider this pre-processing setting, exactly like Ron described. So I have a prover, And the prover says, oh, I know a witness, W, such as this circuit, C of W equals Y. And the verifier is going to get this psi, okay, psi, this digest of the circuit, and we're going to have a 3-message protocol. So the prover is going to send some message M1. This is the first message of the protocol. The verifier is going to respond with some public randomness. Here I'm going to call it just rho. And then once the prover has rho, okay, she can send the second message, okay, which is some function of rho, M2. And after the verifier has all this information, the verifier wants some decision algorithm, okay, so this is V, the verifier Sigma protocol, VSP. So what is the information that the verifier has? The psi, the Y, the M1, rho, and M2, okay, run some decision algorithm and it either accepts or rejects. Okay, so these are Sigma protocols. I'm going to distinguish between two things. We have statistical soundness, which means that these protocols are sound against unbounded provers. Okay, we call this a proof system. And we have computationally soundness, where the security holds against computationally bounded provers. Okay, this is an argument scheme. Okay, so what is the Fiat-Shamir transformation? Like Ron described, it's a way to compile interactive protocols into non-interactive protocols. So we're going to compile this small 3-message protocol to be non-interactive. We have some Fiat-Shamir hash, some hash function h, and the prover is going to compute the same M1 as before. It's going to derive the randomness using the Fiat-Shamir hash. So it's going to hash psi, y, and M1. This is all the information that the verifier has. And then it gets the randomness rho. Now that it has rho, it can derive the second message M2 and just send all of this in one shot to the verifier. What does the verifier do? Well, it derives the same randomness rho and then runs the exact same decision algorithm that it had before. Okay, so this is how I compile the Fiat-Shamir transformation on Sigma protocols. As you all know, this is a transformation that is well deployed in practice and is currently protecting billions of dollars in signature schemes, snarks, blockchains, and more. And we really need to study the security of this transformation. Okay. So, as also Ron mentioned, Poncheval and Stern proved that this transformation is secure in the random oracle model. Okay. And it's proven both for proofs and argument, okay? For proof systems, actually we have a long line of work showing that there exist hash functions that make this transformation secure. So at least we have some nice evidence of this transformation, okay? For argument system, the situation is not so simple, okay? And what happens, as Ron described, we have all of these attacks that work against these argument schemes. So what are these attacks? These are really strong attacks. They're showing that you have a Sigma protocol, you have an interactive protocol. This protocol becomes insecure regardless of the implementation of the function h. Okay, so for any white box implementation, okay, for any circuit that implements this function h, the protocol becomes insecure after you apply the Fiat-Shamir transformation. Okay. Examples of attacks. This is the Barak and Goldwasser Kalai. Okay. Other examples as Ron described. This is on the Killian protocol of PCPs or IOPs when you compile them, and obviously the recent attack on GKR, which is really a natural attack. And I would like to say we didn't coordinate the slides, but I have the same scratch on here. Maybe great mind things alike, but okay. So you can see that this really had some effect on practice, and the worry is actually that this attack could be further developed and have more and more effect on practical systems. I'd like to give some positive news. Okay, we have no attack unlike the Schnorr protocol. So the Schnorr protocol is kind of very specific and doesn't have a lot of room to play with. So currently these attacks do not affect things like the Schnorr protocol. Okay. So let me start by describing our result. So we provide a new transformation, okay? We call it XFS, this is extended Fiat-Shamir. And it's aimed, and I want to emphasize the word aimed, okay, to mitigate white box attacks, okay? When I say white box attacks, these are the deorganization attacks, attacks such as the one Ron talked about, okay? Our solution focuses on practicality, okay? It has a negligible overhead on the running time of the prover and the size of and the communication size. It managed to circumvent the GKR attack, okay? So at least I don't know how to take the GKR attack and make it work on XFS, okay? We also provide some more reliable security. So we give some evidence. So we define a relativized model. And if I have time, I'll talk about it in the end. But this is a model where it's actually an ideal model, like the random oracle model, and we're going to have a random oracle. However, in this model, the Fiat-Shamir transformation is actually not secure, okay? As opposed to the random oracle, where we can prove that the Fiat-Shamir transformation is secure. So you have a model where the Fiat-Shamir transformation is not secure. However, our XFS transformation is provably secure in this idealized model, okay? So this gives us some assurance of security, at least in the sense that if you want to develop a new attack on XFS, you should look at this model and say, oh, this attack, is it captured by this model or not? If the attack can be mounted inside the model, then it won't work, okay? So any attack kind of has to reinvent itself and be somewhat outside of this model, okay? I'll also say that our XFS doesn't protect against all the attacks we know, okay? Particularly, it doesn't protect against these attacks that we talked about, the Barak and Anokilian and the Goldwasser Kalai. So these attacks still work for Fiat-Shamir and for our transformation. However, these attacks are much more contrived, and the GKR one, which is natural, is kind of defended against. Okay? At this point, before I continue, I just want to say that my main point here is that we have this cat and mouse now attack and defense, and I just think this sheds a lot of light that this is kind of becoming a new area of research. I need much more eyeballs and new techniques, okay, to fully understand Fiat-Shamir and its security. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of recap and show you a toy protocol where we can attack, and then I want to show you how the XFS transformation mitigates this attack. Okay. The good news is it's going to be a much simpler attack, so I'm abstracting many things away. Okay, so it's not going to be the full GKR attack, something much simpler. Okay, but it's just a toy protocol. Obviously, this is kind of a contrived example. Okay, so here's our prover and here's our verifier, and we're going to have some commitment scheme. Okay, and the digest of the circuit is just going to be a commitment to the circuit. Okay, so this is what the verifier gets, just a commitment to the circuit. The prover is going to send M1, which is just a commitment to the witness. Okay, the verifier is going to send some randomness row. Now, what is the prover going to do? It's going to decommit to C and W. Okay, so decommit to the circuit and decommit to the witness. Okay. Okay, this is a bit silly. The prover is just sending the entire circuit and witness, okay? And the verifier is just going to check that C on W equals Y, okay? So this is a completely trivial protocol where the verifier just does all the work by himself, except we're going to add this trapdoor. We're going to say either C of W equals Y or the circuit that you already committed to in the pre-processing on the witness that you already committed to in the first message equals 1 concatenated with row, and we'll explain why we need this one, but just think of the row, okay? So somehow the prover managed to predict row in advance, okay? So this is the toy protocol. What does this protocol satisfy? Well, completeness. Obviously, the honest prover is just gonna commit to valid circuits and witnesses, and the verifier is going to accept because of the first condition. Okay? And also, this protocol is sound. Okay? So if the statement is false, then you cannot convince the verifier by the first condition. You can also not convince the verifier by the trapdoor that we added, because there's no way that if you're computationally bounded, so you're committed, you have computationally binding to the commitment scheme. You're committed to the circuit C, you're committed to W already at this point. Now the verifier is going to choose a random row. Okay, there's just a negligible chance that the C and W is going to predict row. Okay, so this protocol is an argument scheme, has computational soundness. Okay. What happens to this protocol after we apply Fiat Shamir? Okay. So we're going to send M1, and we're going to send the decommitment C and W all in one shot. Okay. And what is the verifier going to do? He's going to do the exact same thing, only he's going to derive the randomness row using the Fiat Shamir hash on the digest, okay, and Y and M1. Okay, so this is the compiled protocol. Good. This protocol, after we compiled, is actually insecure. So what I'm going to show in a second is that for any function h, regardless of what this function h is, okay, SHA-256, SHA-3500, doesn't matter, okay, SHA in 1,000 years from now, okay, there is a prover strategy such that for any W, this circuit on W is not going to be equal to Y. However, the verifier is going to accept actually with probability 1. Okay, good. What is this circuit? Well, I just thank Ron for like presenting all the difficult stuff already. So this is kind of a rehash of this. Okay, so we're gonna, and these ideas, of course, stem already from Barak, but kind of everything is taken from Ron's paper. We have the circuit that gets a witness W, okay? So I need to present a prover strategy. So I'm gonna present a circuit and then a witness and Y such that the verifier is gonna accept, okay? So the circuit is gonna parse the witness as this digest, okay? Digest of what? Oh, it's the digest of the circuit itself, exactly the circularity thing that Ron talked about, okay? And Y. We're gonna compute the commitment to W, okay, which we'll call M1. And then we're going to output 1 concatenated with the hash of the digest that we have here, Y that we have here, and M1 that we computed here. Okay, so this is the circuit. Good. Let's see that we satisfy the conditions that we wanted. Okay, and Y is going to be the all 0 string. Okay, so just a long 0 string. The digest is going to be just the commitment to this circuit C, okay? And then the witness is just going to be the concatenation of this digest, okay? And Y, which is just a bunch of zeros. Okay. So notice that Y is the all 0 string, and the circuit always outputs something that starts with 1, right? So no matter what witness we give it, okay, C of W is going to be different than Y. Okay, so this is a truly false statement. Okay, I remind you the focus today is going to be on proving true things, okay, not false things. We're going to start with a false example. Good. Why does the verifier accept? So let's look now at the trapdoor, right? Okay, so obviously the verifier is going to accept because of the trapdoor. So the verifier is going to compute C of W and is going to compare it to 1 concatenated with row. C on W, okay, is exactly, okay, the output of the circuit, which is exactly this thing, okay? And this purple hash that we computed here is exactly the same hash that we have here, okay? So it's exactly 1 concatenated with row. Okay, so the verifier is gonna accept probability 1, okay? And this protocol is insecure, okay? In a nutshell, when we had rounds, there was no way for the prover to predict the verifier row of the randomness. But when you give me a Fiat Shamir hash function, obviously I can predict. I have the code. Okay, I'm going to commit to this code, and this is kind of the way that we predict this function. There's some circularity issues here, and exactly we solve them using this commitment to the witness. Okay. So the main problem was that the circuit C had to compute the randomness row, the Fiat-Shamir randomness, okay, by itself, okay? So it had to compute the verifier next message row, okay? That was the problem. And one naive solution, obviously, is to make the function H more complicated, more complex than the circuit C, okay? Such as kind of, it cannot do it. What are the drawbacks of this solution? So first, well, you're making it slow, right? If I make the hash function more complex, the verifier needs to compute the hash function, okay? So you're making the protocol, the verifier, slower. If we're talking about recursive composition, then I made the verifier slower, and then in the next round of my recursion, the statement that I'm proving is actually the verifier. So now I need another Fiat-Shamir that is more complicated than that, and so on and so on. So it's not very recursive friendly. Okay. And the third point that I want to stress is kind of, fine, let's say I'm fine with a slow verifier. I'm not sure still about the security of this system. Okay, so the Fiat-Shamir hash is more complicated. Is this secure? Okay. And actually the point is that it's more delicate than that. And we're going to see this in a second. Okay, so what we do, we propose an alternative solution. We're going to use some strong variant of proof of work, which I'm going to define. Okay, and the intuition is that we're going to make the Fiat-Shamir hash function H very, very hard to compute. So it's going to be very complex and complicated. However, it's going to be very easy to verify. So the verifier doesn't need to compute this hash function by itself. It only needs to be able to verify it. Okay? So the deterministic complexity of H is going to be large, but the non-deterministic complexity of H is going to be small. Okay. So let's start by just seeing the XFS transformation. And to describe the transformation, I just need a proof of work. And so I'm just going to define the notion of proof of work that I need. So a proof of work is going to be parameterized by some hardness parameter L, okay? Think of L as being 2 to the 20, okay? Like something mediumly hard. This is something that the prover should be able to compute. So it's not like 2 to the lambda. It's not 2 to the 100. We have two algorithms. Solve is something that gets a puzzle, Z. So Z is like our challenge, our puzzle, and then defines something we need to solve. And we have an algorithm that solves the puzzle in time L. And check that gets a puzzle and a solution and can very quickly verify that the solution is correct. Okay? These are the completeness properties of kind of any proof of work. The security that we want is that we have negligible in lambda, negligible probability, okay, of solving the puzzle if you run in time less than L. Okay? Even if you have preprocessing, let me define this more accurately. You have an algorithm, so this is kind of this big algorithm. It runs in time much, much bigger than L, but it's a preprocessing algorithm. It doesn't know the puzzle Z. So it runs in some large time and produces some state. Okay? And yeah, and maybe gets some public parameters if your proof of work has a setup. Okay? If it doesn't, then it doesn't. Good. So it passes on some auxiliary state. Now you have a second algorithm. This is a small algorithm. This is an algorithm that runs in time less than L. Okay? So this algorithm is not supposed to be able to solve the puzzle, even though it got the auxiliary state of somebody that ran in time more than L, but this guy ran before the puzzle was chosen. So a puzzle is freshly chosen, given to this small algorithm, okay? It has time t2 that is less than L, okay? And we want that this algorithm, the probability that it produces a solution that is valid is going to be negligible in lambda, okay? So kind of very, very small probability. So this is the security that we want from the puzzle. And let me compare it to stuff that you might know of. So our strong notion of proof of work is actually stronger than kind of the common known, the Bitcoin proof of work, of just finding a salt that hashes to sufficiently many zeros. Okay? And well, maybe I already say, so the main reason is that for kind of the Bitcoin proof of work, I can always solve a Bitcoin proof of work in O of 1 time just by guessing a solution, and I will be right with probability 1 over L. Okay? And we want that if you run in time less than L, your probability is kind of negligible. I don't want you to succeed with probability 2 to the minus 20. Okay? If you didn't run it enough time, your probability is 2 to the minus 100. Okay? So it's a stronger notion than the Bitcoin proof of work. But actually, it's a weaker notion than maybe something, the proof of sequential work, which is actually weaker than verifiable delay functions, VDFs. Okay? So it's a weaker notion than sequential work. Sequential work would suffice. Okay? And stronger than Bitcoin proof of work. And we actually give 2 different constructions of this proof of work with kind of 5 minutes. Okay. With trade-offs between the size of the solution. Okay. So let's now see the transformation. Okay. So the prover is gonna choose the first message M1. Okay. Now, before the prover has the permission to derive the randomness raw for the verifier, he first needs to derive kind of in a Fiat-Shamir manner, derive the puzzle Z that we want to solve. After we have the puzzle Z, okay, we solve it and get the solution S. And only after we have the solution S, we're kind of allowed to do the Fiat-Shamir hash, okay? So we're going to hash as before, only we concatenate now the solution S. And this allows us to get raw. Okay, and then we can compute M2. And now we're sending everything to the verifier, so M1, M2 as before, and the new solution S. What does the verifier do? Well, the verifier can derive the puzzle in the same way. That's easy. The verifier can now derive raw, right? Because he has the solution, so he can derive raw. He's going to do the same decision algorithm that he did before. And one extra step, he needs to check the solution to the proof of work. Okay, so he's going to check this. Okay, so this is the new transformation. Okay. Let's see what happens for this new transformation on the toy protocol that we saw before. Okay, so remember the toy protocol, we kind of just committed to everything and then decommitted to it. Okay, and we had the counter example. And we can ask, does this attack work on XFS? Okay, so we need to modify the circuit C now to compute raw, right? If we want the circuit to attack. Okay, so fix any Fiat-Shamir hash function. Okay, this is the compiled protocol with XFS. Okay, now added the puzzle and added the check to the solution. Let's modify the circuit to compute raw. So we're going to parse as before. We're going to compute M1. Now we're going to compute the puzzle Z. Okay, no problem. We can do it. We're going to solve Z and get S. And now we're going to output this. Okay. This circuit now, just as before, is going to compute raw and convince the verifier. So what do? The only thing, and the same setting as before. What we do, we put the hardness of the proof of work L to be larger than the size of the circuit. Okay. So the prover should first decide on some circuit, or circuit size at least, and after we have the size of the circuit, we can define L to be slightly larger than C. If L is larger than C, then there's no way that this circuit computes the puzzle, okay, solves the puzzle. Okay, so it cannot run this thing, okay, and be the same size. Okay, you could say, wait, but maybe the witness that the circuit gets can help it solve the puzzle, right? Like before, we encoded things inside the witness, okay? But just you have to observe that when the puzzle Z is computed, okay, it's computed as the hash of these things, and this is the hash of the circuit, okay? And M1 is the commitment of the witness, okay? So the prover first needs to commit to the circuit and the witness, and only then kind of we Fiat-Shamir and get the puzzle Z. Okay. I don't have much time, so I'm just gonna end with one slide about what provably security we have. So we define this idealized model, a relativized model, okay, where we have a random oracle H, okay, but opposed to how people have proved Fiat-Shamir, where they kind of assume that we have some sigma protocol and then we add a random oracle H. We're going to have this random oracle H, and we're going to have all parties have oracle access to H. So the prover has oracle access to H, the verifier has oracle access to H, and the circuit has Oracle access to H. So the circuit has NOT gates, AND gates, OR gates, and H gates. Okay? So the circuit can have a gate to compute the random oracle. And this is all before, in the Sigma protocol, before we compiled. Now we're going to compile this using XFH. Okay? We're going to compile this with the same hash function H. We're not introducing some new function. Okay? Good. So first, let's just look at the circuit we had before. Okay? The circuit we had before, it only needed Oracle access to H, right? Okay. Also needed to compute a commitment. Maybe although this commitment had Oracle access to H. So we can actually mount the same toy example we had before inside this model. We didn't actually need the code of H. We only needed that the circuit had Oracle access to H. And in this model, we can actually have the same attack. So in this model, Fiat Shamir is not secure. Okay? However, what we can prove is that in this model, we have the following theorem. Okay? The XFS star, there's some modification that we need to do that I didn't talk about. Okay? If you give it a Sigma protocol, okay, just a 3-message protocol, a public coin 3-message protocol, with something called round-by-round knowledge soundness, okay, but just a knowledge sound secure, let's forget about the round-by-round, okay, a kappa, and you give it a strong proof of work with some error epsilon, okay, this is kind of the probability that someone will solve the proof of work with small time. Then the XFS transformation outputs a non-interactive protocol with error O of t times kappa plus t times epsilon, where t is the number of queries or the running time of the malicious prover. Okay? So this is what you would expect from a standard Fiat Shamir transformation, and we have this added error here. Okay? And yeah, the XFS star is a slight modification of what we saw, and I won't have time to talk about this, so I'll just move forward.
Where can we read about it?
Yeah, it's online. You can.
Online?
Yeah.
And you published it in, or you got accepted in?
It's submitted, yeah.
Submitted.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, so just a short summary. We saw that the Fiat Shamir is actually insecure, and Ron talked about this in more depth. We proposed XFS as a way to mitigate these solutions, at least mitigate this GKR attack, at least for now until the next version. We used a strong proof of work, and I didn't have time to show you how we construct these strong proof of works. And we have some, heuristic, at least, proof of security in a relativized model. Well, it's a proof in the relativized model, but it's a heuristic sense of security. Some future work. So I only talked about 3-message protocol and not extremely trivial how to extend this to multi-round. It's ongoing work. You can maybe, instead of the relative models, talk about stronger models, algebraic models, and prove security of the XFS transformation in those models. Okay, that would actually be able to completely mount the GKR attack. Okay, you can do an analyze of this Fiat Shamir with sponges. We assume a completely random function. In reality, we don't have completely random functions. We do this sponge construction, and it changes the way you need to prove security. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Man, it's bright in here. Okay. Well, I don't know. I had a couple of questions maybe to direct the conversation.
Michele, if I may, introduce yourself.
Hello. Excuse me. My name is Michele Roux. I work in the area of zero knowledge, and recently I've been involved in trying to standardize some of these zero knowledge proofs. And so, as such, I think, as we all are, I was a bit worried about these attacks. And with this conversation, the purpose is to try to understand better maybe what are the limits, but also guide a little bit the conversation with some questions that might come on frequently. Maybe also to warm up, one question is like, on a more personal level, what did you learn with this paper? You've both been, working with Fia Shamir for a long time, especially you, Ron. And so, what does this paper give you, and how has it changed your understanding? And here I'm talking more at the intuition level, not even, things that you are completely sure of.
Thanks for the question. So I'll give a bit of a meta answer, but I think it's quite a good lesson to share with others. So I think there was a really good interaction in this work between theory and practice. So obviously I'm coming for a more theoretical background. My collaborators who are really wonderful are coming from a much more practical side. So that's superficially, but moreover, we've known about the contrived attacks for many years, and certainly the theory community was very well aware of this. And I was personally, since we had this paper in 2019, which attacked kind of the Killian type of protocol, and since then I've been very interested in trying to attack real-world protocols. But I never looked at the protocols that we attack, because from a theoretical perspective, it doesn't make sense. This protocol, which is very practical, because in theory land, you don't need to, the point about doing this GKR thing is to commit to less data. You commit only to the witness, rather than more traditional approaches which commit to the entire computation. And in theory land, commit to just the witness, commit to the entire thing. It all goes into a big O somewhere. So, people, I think in that community weren't really looking at this protocol. But in the applied community, what do you mean? Commit only to a witness versus commit to everything is a huge difference. So this protocol became of interest, and that's why we started looking at it. So I think it was a good marriage between the theoretical perspective, which knew that there was an issue, but kind of wasn't quite looking at the right places, and the practical side, which kind of zoomed in on what should the theoreticians also look at.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Ilan, what did you learn with this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, okay, I have to say I was kind of waiting and expecting these attacks of Ron to so I knew all about them, and I was kind of always waiting for the next episode. And actually, in parallel to these attacks, I had a lot of thought of how can we prove Fiat Shamir for arguments? So with concrete hash functions. So that's something that we focused on doing for proofs and not for arguments. And with all this thinking, my realization was that, okay, if I want to do some Fiat Shamir for arguments, I need to modify Fiat Shamir. I need more strong properties. I need to augment my protocol more and change it before I'll get some structure, okay, that I can get. That in proofs we have hard structure. In arguments we don't have structure. So I need to embed this structure artificially. And so I need to change the Fiat Shamir transformation to give me this structure, and then maybe we can have a Fiat Shamir with concrete hash functions for the Killian protocol and stuff like that, this gives us snarks that we use in practice. To this date, this didn't give any fruits, okay? However, when I saw Ron's paper coming out, I'm like, this is a real attack. This is worrying to the entire community. I'm like, okay, this is now my message that Fiat Shamir is not the last word. It's not the transformation. It's the start. It's very simple and elegant, and that's why we all like it. But it might not be the last word, and we need to think of more and more variants of this transformation. And then I'm like, okay, now I have a slightly different goal. I need structure against this attack and not against the arbitrary arguments. And that really helped to close two places in my mind and really come to this paper.
And going back to you, Ron, if you have to think about this solution of maybe framing the problem in terms of a relativized world where there are also these oracle gates. Do you think this is the way to go? How do you feel about the solution? What would be your approach here?
Okay, cool. So first of all, I think Galen and Elon's work is super interesting, and it's great that, you know, at the end of the day, when you apply it, we don't have an attack. We propose something different with kind of pros and cons. Regarding analysis in idealized worlds, I think I'm going back to the original CGH paper, and specifically there's a part there that Oded Goddard wrote, which I strongly agree with, which is kind of saying that analysis in an idealized model is fantastic as a sanity check. So it's way better to have this because it tells you about, like, rules out some forms of attacks. But I think for a long time we've been interpreting in this context that security in the idealized model and the random oracle actually implies real security. I think this was very common. And this work shows that it is not the case. And I think we should be very careful about interpreting results in this context. We can talk about other contexts as well. But in this context of general purpose snargs, we should be cautious about interpreting results in idealized model as actually indicating full security. And I think also the specific model, Elon already touched about it, but the specific model that they suggest is great in the terms of, like, it's geared at addressing the types of attacks that we have. But on the other hand, it doesn't quite capture all of the attacks and some stuff that we would want to catch. So I think there's also, I do think there's good research to be done about finding a more idealized model. But also that even when we get to that, like, idealized model, we should be careful about how to interpret its security.
Okay, thank you. And so,
can I just add on that?
oh, of course, yeah. Please.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to add that so the actual Ron's attack, okay, the GKR Ron's attack. You have two parcels. Sorry. So the GKR attack, it's very simple to the attack I described, but then it runs the GKR protocol. So it gives kind of a proof on this function H. Okay, a non-trivial proof on a concrete function H. And to do that, it actually needs the code of the function. It goes layer by layer and does it. If you try to mount this attack to the relativized model, where we only have oracle access to H, so the circuit can have oracle access to H, and then the toy example that I showed works out, but you cannot run the GKR part. Okay, so I cannot take the GKR attack as is and mount it to our framework, to our model. To do that, I would need kind of a stronger model that allows to do kind of GKR types of computations, either a algebraic model or something else. That would be very nice to kind of border the things, the family of attacks that do not work, okay, and actually point us to new attacks that might work. One other thing that I wanted to mention is that for proof systems, we have this long line of work that shows that, okay, there is some implementation, maybe not practical, of a hash function that makes the Fiat-Shamir transformation work, okay? Even if this is not practical, it still shows you something important. It shows you cannot do this type of attack where you're saying, for any implementation, I'm going to attack. Because we know there's one that doesn't work. So if you want to attack these proof systems, okay, that do not use these impractical hash functions, they use something practical like SHA-256 or something, that you need to exploit the specific structure of the hash function, okay? That seems much, much harder. For argument systems, okay, things that start with commitments and stuff like that, which is what we use in practice, we still don't have this kind of parallel results of some impractical hash function that suffices for Fiat-Shamir. And I think that would be like another strong indication for security. So at least you know that you cannot have this general attacks that, you know, any white box implementation, and all these attacks are in the same family, like any white box implementation works. So I think that would be another like parallel effort in kind of...
So the heuristic assumption would now be not that we're replacing an idealized hash function by a practical one, just like we're replacing an impractical hash function that provably works with a practical one, and I think this is a good direction.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Well, and now that we are talking about these assumptions, Ron, you've been working for a long time on this line of work that tries to do Fia-Shamir in the standard model, and you didn't talk about it during your talk, and so I was curious if you could maybe give us an understanding of what are the core properties that you try to get when you try to instantiate it in the standard model, and what is the ingredient that allows you to have this property, maybe?
Sure. So it's a relatively recent line of work from like I think 2016 or 2017, in which we show that some work by myself and some by others, but we show that for some protocols you can actually compile them using Fia-Shamir with a concrete hash function in a provable way. This is what we're talking about. The key dividing factor, which Elon also talked about, is that the protocol that you start off with is statistically sound, meaning that it's sound even against an unbounded cheating prover. And for that scenario, it turns out that there are ways, which actually took the community a long time to come up with, to provably instantiate Fia-Shamir. These protocols are more restrictive, so we've been able to extend it to even beyond only statistically sound protocols, but only to an extent. But nowadays we have like beautiful theoretical results, but showing, so for example, SNARGs for P. So you can prove the correctness of a deterministic computation. There's a very expensive computation that takes time t to compute. You can provably using Fia-Shamir, you can actually prove it though, and to verify that runs in pi-logarithmic time. The catch is that you're only able to do it for deterministic kind of problems in P. It's only computation. It's not. There's no exist a witness kind of thing going on. So that's kind of the limitation. We've gone past that a bit, but that's where this line of work stands. And yeah, so it's a huge open problem also in the theory literature to extend it beyond.
And just to make sure, they could also plug also in sort of the Fia transformation in the way that we use it today. It's just about building something around it.
Yes. So it's designing protocols for which you can prove stuff. The application of the Fia-Shamir, there are some levels of nuances, which maybe this is not. So it's at the high level definitely it's the same. At the lower level, it's you need to be a bit careful about how you do it.
Thank you. Going more into the sort of standardization dialogue, I've been now working for many years on standardizing Fia-Shamir and Sigma protocols. And in particular, one of the things that I realized while doing Fia-Shamir is that it has not really been proven or precisely described. And also thanks to the extreme patience and rigors of Ale, we made a paper that's just out of the press, 2025-536, I think, in terms of reprint report. But we tried to prove the security of Fia-Shamir going all the way down to what's inside the hash function. There is a duplex sponge construction. And so if we look inside, there is a permutation function. And as long as the permutation function is kept as an oracle, this ideal permutation model, we are able to prove things secure. And so I guess the question there is that this oracle there still leaves room open for attacks, right? Mm-hmm. But I guess, is there any way in which this analysis can sort of help you maybe rule out some attacks, but also on a more general level, knowing that there is a hash function that's done in this way, it's not about anymore proving maybe that for any hash function the system is secure. Right. It's more about this specific instantiation. And so how do you feel about this possibility? Right. Would it help you? Would it be more difficult because now it's as a fixed block thing?
So maybe just to spell out what you're saying, because it's a particular form of hash function, it actually kind of potentially makes the life of an attacker easier, because it doesn't, in the current diagonalization style attacks, we have results of the form, we can break it no matter what hash function you use. If you restrict the family, then there's potential that could be beneficial. And I think it's really important to look into that. I do have a feeling that some forms of hash function might have convenient structure that would help attack somewhat. In particular, if you if you do something like Merkle-Damgard, you operate in distinct ways on different parts and don't immediately mix everything together. It smells to me beneficial. I don't have any concrete attacks in mind.
Mm. And if you had to think about a transformation that does Fia-Shamir in a secure way, do you think this is still the right way? We should try to formalize how to do sponges, or do you think we should take a step back and try to see on a more general level, like what is the formalization that needs to be done there? What is
Yeah,
the
I'll
right
first
model?
comment that, okay, so this is what I tried to reference at the last slide, that this analysis with duplex and permutation and these sponges, one thing I would like to see is the XFS transformation analyzed with our new analysis of our transformation together with actual sponges and these implementation. And one reason is actually we add like more and more things to the hash. We add this solution for the strong proof of work. The solution is not like 100 bits. It's a bit big. So like a sponge construction would work on it. So actually it would be very interesting to see kind of what actually happens there. I think that's a good question. Yeah.
Nice. And you know, going forward with the standardization process, maybe one last question is like, do you feel like these attacks can be mounted on Sigma protocols and specifically like Schnorr proofs for representation, so something more complex than just Schnorr signatures? Like, what's your worry there?
Can I start?
Like,
So I have I think, something positive to say and something negative to say. So I'll start with the positive. So I think there's really a dividing line in the way that we're currently applying Fiat Shamir versus how it was done in the 80s or 90s. To me, it seems like the more traditional applications where you take some like specific Sigma protocol based on some like Schnorr's protocol or something very concrete, and you apply Fiat Shamir. I have no like even beginning of an idea of how to give a concrete practical attack against something like this. And like the dividing line is that in the modern way that we're using Fiat Shamir, we're applying it to protocols that are meant to prove correctness of a general purpose computation. And that's what sort of lets us try to reason about the Fiat Shamir hash function inside the protocol. And that is a cause of a lot of havoc. So in terms of my gut feeling, I think applications for Sigma protocols for concrete things, I feel much more comfortable than the general setting. So that's my state of mind.
it's relieving because we have like 6 RFC drafts that I use.
So having said that, I do want to touch upon the general purpose computations because it's not something theoretical anymore. There are things that are being run and protecting, Elon said, billions of dollars, which I think is quite true. And I think like Elon sort of predicted this cat and mouse game. And I just want to emphasize that I'm very concerned about a potential cat and mouse game because, I mean, currently with this attack, we attacked a particular protocol that a few companies were using. We're attacking a particular circuit that looks like, but is not quite what's being proved. So, like, I don't know how to, generate money from, like print money or like prove, do like a real world attack. However, I think if this cat and mouse, I think even like one iteration of a cat and mouse game. So if something like our mitigation against the attack or Elon's mitigation, Elon and Gal's mitigation against the attack are broken, then I'm not sure that I see it like a dividing line between GKR versus like Starks, like Fry and so on. So I'm quite worried about the potential. So I think like, if there is an attack, we'll probably be able to come up with mitigation, but these are systems that are being run, and I don't like the idea of an attack against them.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. So we have this Fiat Shamir transformation, and as we apply it to like a more and more complex system, it's like more vulnerable, okay? And that's where ones come in, and he has all these attacks. We look at the Fiat Shamir for like very, very simple Sigma protocols like a Schnorr protocol, kind of don't see a way of attacking it, and we have some hope maybe we can actually prove stuff. Something that kind of came up in our work is that kind of roughly what happens in our proof is we say, let's take a Fiat Shamir for some simple system and bootstrap it to a Fiat Shamir for a more complex system. So the security of the Fiat Shamir or some transformation for the more complex system relies, or boils down, has a reduction to attacking a Fiat Shamir on a very simple system. And I think that is a very promising way of kind of extending security to more and complex functionalities.
Yeah. And
maybe we can add questions from the crowd.
of course.
Oh, big question. You
Nigel?
can, yeah, you
Nigel's
can
Mark.
shout, right? Wait, no, but you have a...
Who I think was one of the people that did the first letter to NIST about we need to standardize ZKPs, no?
Okay, maybe, yeah.
Say your name.
Oh, yeah, I'm not... the voice gone now. It's Nigel Smart. Cool, two very cool talks. Really super cool. And the attacks were really, really cute in that you had this really, really simple circuits, both of them. And you called on for people to come up with proving more false statements. So I'm kind of interested in how did you invent this attack? How did you come up with that simple circuit in the first place? What was your thought process doing this research? Because that would inspire other people to come up with similar attacks on other things. Because you kind of pulled it like a rabbit out of a hat.
Yeah. So this is a bit of a shorter version of the talk. So I have, I think there's an online version of a talk that I gave at Stanford that gives like a toy example, which is somewhat similar to Elon's toy version. I think even simpler. But really, like the main thing is know the literature, and I think the previous works on the contrived examples were very much in my mind, and it seemed like a key thing is to be able to predict the future-mere randomness. And I was working on trying to. This didn't just like pop up. I was working for many years trying to break stuff like Killian's protocol using like an actual PCP or IOP, and it was always the case that the circuits we were trying to attack verification circuits that were very, very shallow. They were just doing like a conjunction of low degree tests, and you couldn't like fit in the future-mere hash function. And when we were talking with Lev and Dimitri, we started like thinking about protocols that we can attack, and when realizing that people are using GKR and you have the entire circuit that you can do it, that sort of led to an attack. But really the key point thing to keep in mind, and I think the potential for extensions is via diagonalization. So know your diagonalization. I think the CGH paper is an amazing paper, so it's really good to look at that. I think for me, in terms of next steps, the thing I'm concerned about but don't know how to do is so currently all of the attacks need for the circuit to be able to compute the future-mere hash function. If we could mount an attack in which all that the circuit needs to do is verify a future-mere hash function, as we all know, verifying is much, much easier than computing. So you'd be able to do with much, much simpler circuits, and I think all of the mitigations that we have would break if you could do something like this. And I don't know how to do it right now, but that I think that's what I encourage people to think about.
Food for thought.
We have all the way there. And then
Hi. Have you thought about what sufficient conditions there are to prove that a circuit isn't vulnerable or backdoored?
So in terms of proving, I think you're going to have a difficult. So there is like a question of like, what are obviously bad things for it to contain? And we see that containing the future-mere hash function is risky business. That's what you don't want it to contain. In terms of proving, what you would need to do is like show that for circuits of this class of circuits, the transformation future-mere works with some particular hash function. And we're very far from proving things of this form. You could think of like some maybe intermediate step of like for some circuit family in the ROM, things still work. There you have sort of like two things you should be concerned. Does that make sense? So two things you should be concerned about. If you're doing the future-mere hash function, it's a major concern. But we also have in our paper these non-adaptive attacks in which the circuit actually doesn't contain the future-mere hash function. So what it does contain are things of the form of like universal computation. So that's another thing you should beware, but it's also very useful because if it's there, it's because you need it. So these are two things to be wary of, and I think we're pretty far from being able to prove.
Okay. I'll also comment on that. So I think it's actually a very interesting question to try to characterize the actual protocols that we have deployed and we're using and show that they satisfy some property that we'll call kind of non-contrived. And we should try to make them different than kind of the contrived examples. And then if we really have some nice property, we can say, look, this is actually a natural property. All our systems, satisfy it. The contrived examples do not satisfy this property. Then we can say, okay, let's try to prove security of a Fiat-Shamir transformation for natural protocols that satisfy this nice property. And that might be an easier task than trying to prove security for like all circuits, right? All verifiers, all everything, even contrived things.
So in a sense, that's what this like line of theory literature has been able to do, right? We show that for some protocols, we can make it happen.
Yeah.
My question is related to the first one. I'm lacking here the theoretical background. Maybe it's a stupid question, but how, for example, the mitigation of expander, how is it proven that you can't represent a certain hash function?
Nothing is proved.
With this?
It's, so again, to repeat, what is their mitigation, which we propose it in the sense that we don't know in attack.
No, I mean just the statement that there is no circuit of certain depth.
Yes, absolutely. So that's like so among other things, we are conjecturing there that there is a circuit of we're implementing the hash function in a particular depth, and we are conjecturing that there is no smaller depth that does it. And these are things that we are very bad in complexity theory at proving. We're very good at conjecturing them. But not proving.
Is it supported by the security analysis of the hash
Sorry?
function? Is this kind of intuition supported by the security of the hash function itself? Like when you apply Boolean solvers, and you try.
So in particular, like think of taking your hash function and composing it with itself. And suppose your hash function was computable in depth D. Then when you compose it, you can compute it in depth 2D. And I feel comfortable conjecturing that you should not be able to do it better, but obviously it depends on the hash function, and I can cook up a hash function for which you can. They are, basing their current security relies on the fact that you cannot do it for Poseidon. If you repeat enough Poseidons, there is no speed up or speed up in terms of depth. So that is like a kind of a complexity theoretic conjecture that you can make about the hash function. I think I don't think that part is unreasonable, but it is a concern.
I would be a bit cautious about this. So if you remember, the reason we needed this very strong proof of work is exactly because in order to make to mount this attacks to succeed, even for kind of an H of an H, hash function, you kind of need to be able to compute the Fiat-Shamir hash function only on one input, and even with very small probability. Right? We want security 2 to the minus 100. If you have some probability 2 to the minus 70 to actually be able to compute this H of H in less depth, then the attack would work, and we do not want that. So kind of formalizing, you're asking, is it secure? I would say you have to be cautious.
Absolutely. To second that, and also even if you're only approximating the hash, I would be concerned.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Just to make sure how much time we have left.
We have 3 more questions.
Okay. And there is also the gentleman on the black coat. Yeah, okay, good. All right.
Okay, so thank you for the great talk. One of the things that you mentioned, there was this quote by your dad, which basically can say that the mileage of an idealized model can vary, right? They are a good sanity check, but they are not really the full story. Right. On the other end, we've known for a while that in the theory thing, there are limitations on what we can prove about certain arguments. There's things that we know, this Genscher-Weak lower bound. So in a sense, my question is, what hope is there? What can we we can try to prove things for limited class of computation, P, UP, and all that kind of stuff. But then there's the idealized model are really the only thing that we can try to get to. And there's this kind of gap between what we can prove in the idealized model and what we know we cannot prove for things that we care about is stuff in MP. So the question is what is the hope?
Okay, so I can try, and maybe if others want to add as well. So I think for me, the hope, which I think is very ambitious, is to try to prove in the plane model, and that's what I would like to see to be done. What Jacome is mentioning is that there are also like negative indications that it's going to be very, very hard to do this. So there are papers stating theorems of this form, in particular work by Craig Gentry of FHE fame and Daniel Wicks of all kinds of fame. However, their paper, there have been all kinds of ways to kind of navigate around it. So I don't view it as a showstopper. I view it as making things very hard, but not a showstopper. So I do think there's potential. That's what I would hope for. I am not happy with settling for idealized model security. For the moment, it seems hard to go beyond that.
I have two questions. One is probably a little more personally motivated. When it comes to being like safer, like in terms of designing, would you say that constant round protocols like Ligero and Sigma protocols are safer than non-constant rounds, the ones that go log-n or beyond? And the second question is, we usually don't deal with circuit models when lookups are involved. There are RAM. There's like, our model of computation is more RAM. So does the attack change, or like, can you view the attack still even for ones that use lookup arguments?
Right. So the first question was about like whether I think that the rounds affect it. Indirectly, yes. So we're using like GKR, which is a multi-round protocol, and we're leveraging a particular property that GKR has, which is like not committing to the entire transcript, which you cannot do if you have a constant round protocol. So in that particular sense, we would definitely need a new idea in order to attack a constant round protocol. But sort of if you take, I think like, I mentioned as an open problem, if you can mount a similar attack against GKR in the case in which the circuit being proved is more shallow than the Fiat-Shamir hash function. If you do something like this, then I think things like Ligero, like Starks, in my eyes, they look exactly the same. And I would see no, so really for me, that's a dividing line in terms of like the cat and mouse game. I think if the cat goes into this like next layer, then I think a lot of protocols that we use might be exposed, including constant round protocols. The second question was about like circuits versus like VMs or RAMs and so on. I think it's a good question. Like VMs, as you know, and as I'm also working at Sync now, so no, VMs are more complicated to deal with and making life as an attacker harder. Circuits, you have more control. To me, it feels a little bit of like, it's only, when you make things messy, it's harder to reason about them. I don't think there's like a core thing that makes them safer. That's my feeling.
Yeah. Hi, can you comment on the widespread usage of recursion in some of these generalized VMs and circuits as well? Do you also want to respond? And I can also add.
Yeah, I'll say a few things. So, yeah, there's a lot of use of recursive composition of proof systems. And there's a question of, what happens to the security? So you start with one system that has some security, and then you kind of do recursive composition, and maybe you do a tree of recursive composition, and it's deeper and deeper. And the question is, what happens to the error, right? What happens to the security? Does it degrade with the depth? Does it degrade with the size? So that's a good question. In the most general theorem, actually what we know to prove, the security actually degrades, right? So if you have kind of a rewinding knowledge type of security and you're doing recursive composition, then security slowly degrades. However, we do have some more recent work showing kind of that if you have a stronger security notion in some relativized world, or if you have a straight line extractor or stuff like that, then you can do a much more tighter analysis and you don't lose in this composition, and you can virtually show that you don't lose security when you're doing recursive composition. So I would say that it depends exactly on what we're doing.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess.
Let's stop here. Thank you again for this discussion and going deeper into these topics. I think we all learned quite a lot about the attack and and how it affects our world. Thanks again. And introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, John, and for the amazing talks before.
Just 1 second. We want global streaming. Go.
Thank you, John, for the introduction and for the amazing talks before. As John mentioned, this is on the applied side of ZKProof systems. And I'm from JP Morgan Chase from London in the Department of Global Technology Applied Research under Marco Pistoia. And we are looking on how we can bring ZKProof system to financial institutions. And in this talk, I would like to introduce you to our open source new library called Paddle, a framework for exploring private auditable and distributed ledger specifically for financial institutions. And hopefully this talk we will see some relevant use cases and considerations that we make when we construct transaction schemes. Sorry, play, I guess. Yeah, I just mentioned that, yes, Satanji should have been presenting here and help me a bit with a walkthrough through the code, but he's watching, and later on we, of course, can interact and talk more. So I will start with just maybe a simple analogy that I have and I find maybe a bit funny but interesting to explain how important is privacy for financial institutions. And when my daughter was 3 years old, we would help her going to the toilet, dress up, and also doing everything we can for her. But at some point, she grew independent and decided to tell me, please give me some privacy. And the idea that she decided to have and try these tasks independently just because she wanted privacy was, I think, interesting moment to think that privacy enable the technology that we built, and ZKProof, of course, is improving all the time and hopefully would enable this technology of distribution of ledger that maybe later could even help distributing to more children when they're independent and you can do something else. So, of course, financial institutions are a bit older, but they also have the privacy as a great asset. But with privacy as a great asset, they also have the auditing aspect and the ability to minimize the risk of operation and therefore to get trust to all participants in transactions and trades. And the byproduct, of course, of having this auditing that maybe would be even remote and instant, that would allow not opening sensitive data and constantly maybe maintaining banks on a level of risk that could be operational. We also would be able to reduce settlements, overhead, and or maybe intermediates in payment systems that will allow us instant transaction closer to what we see on the public domain and cryptocurrency, but different. So in financial institution, we're not necessarily looking at decentralization of the problem, but maybe the distribution of the ledger to an encrypted ledger. And here I'm just looking at several considerations that might be slightly different from the popular transaction scheme that we see outside. One of the main considerations, and I've seen here that Blockstream is here, so they also looked at multi-asset, but for cryptocurrency. But in financial system, multi-assets is important, especially for when risk becomes relevant in the bond market, debit market. These are risks that needs to be taken in multi-asset fashion. So there is exchange, usually of cash and another asset. And also, maybe a bit counterintuitive is a trust. The trust, no trust setup or transparent or a transparent framework is necessary as a starting point, because imagine you have independent regulators or auditors that are going to look at your ledger, then no trusted setup or transparent framework is actually necessary as a starting point. And of course, at some point, there will be added trust that will be relevant to the use case that we have. And then there will be maybe a quite complex privacy map. So we will be needed to accommodate different privacy requirements from each actor in a transaction. And maybe that's maybe related to the previous talks, that we need established cryptography. It means that we need to wait and see what the academy come up with. For example, if there are certain attacks or vulnerabilities that might be able. And it's positive to hear that Sigma protocols are still okay. So we are here to present Paddle, which is a framework to explore privacy and auditable distributed multi-asset ledger. And I'm here showing maybe the two popular versions outside for private auditable or private transactions that's verifiable on cryptocurrency. For example, Zeta for tokenization, and ZK Ledger for more related to financial institution, but doesn't deal with necessarily with confidential multi-assets or any implementation that would be relevant to smart contract. So in Paddle, we are looking maybe on a simple case where the data structure is very simple, is based on table, similar to actually to what ZK Ledger provide. But here we have 3 dimensions to the table. We will have the asset, which is confidential, and each row will contain several assets of transactions, and the columns will be the participants that are going to transact or observe the transaction. And you can see that what we see here is just a table, and that will make the construction of the transaction seem relatively simple, but of course it won't be scalable to a public solution like in fully decentralized system. However, we can still always deploy it on blockchain and be able to enjoy the benefit of validation of transaction and all the infrastructure of EVM type, but it will be constructed to the specific set of participants. And in this case, the set of participants is also the set of anonymity that we are desired to be play with. And here you see that the transaction scheme is based on Pedersen commitments as well as the signature to the public key of the participant. So this is also, we took it directly from what ZK Ledger proposed, but now we will change a bit of how the transaction scheme and what is a cell construct from. So if we have a Pedersen commitment that's initially perfectly hiding, but then when we have a signature of its randomness to the token, what we call the audit token, then it becomes computationally binding, but it allows us to be able to extract, if you have the secret key, the value of the hidden commitment. So this is very convenient if you then later want to disclose information or build your privacy map. And for that, we will show that a cell here is now consists of a commit token, some Sigma protocol proof of consistency to make sure that the randomness is binding, and it's the same in the commit, and the token correspond to the participant. And then we will have also complementary commit and complementary token, which are recommitting by other participants, and we will see how it looks like. But the idea is that the other participants are the ones that are going to provide proof of assets, which means that they're going to provide us the range proof that will tell us that there is no double spending or creating of asset. And we will see that the proof of equivalence is required now, because if another participant extracted the value from the commit, from the original commit of the broadcaster, then it will need also to provide some proof of equivalence to make sure that it's the same value. Again, those are Sigma protocols, and here proof of asset would be a range proof. Typically, or the best way to do that at the moment for now, for us, is using bullet proofs. And what we will see here now is a scheme of the multi-asset transaction. And on the right, I'm mentioning how it was, or how it looks like in ZK Ledger or Zeta type of transaction, where there is no interaction between the parties. But in the multi-asset, you will have extra round of communication. And I will try to justify why is it okay in the use cases for financial institution when you have multi-assets. So in the injective transaction, it's a simple case where you would, where the sender or the broadcaster will provide all the proof of asset for all the participants by knowing that he's going to debit its own account or on behalf of someone else, but the rest of the participants must have positive values. So it's only for debiting transaction, but in the multi-asset you can do whatever you want in terms of who is the input and the output of the transaction and who is debiting and crediting. So we can see here that you have the first round where the sender is going to just send the commit and tokens, which are the transaction input and output. And this is, of course, a homomorphic ledger, so this should sum to 1, or multiplication of the commitment should be 1, equals to 1. And that means that we are going to make sure that this is the balance of the assets. And now for each participant, then they will be able to extract the value from the commit token, given that it was assigned to their public key. And once they can once they can extract their value, then they are able to provide the proof of asset, which will then will have another round of communication with the ledger to complete the full cell, and the full cell is then going to verification. So the idea is that you will have another round of communication to provide all the proof of asset from all participants, and therefore you will get cells that you cannot differentiate between each other. They all have the same structure, and according to the DDH, the combined system should hold. And you would then be able to prove the anonymity under this set of participants, and you will be able to generate concurrent range proof, and the most important, you will be able to exchange assets. And the idea behind it is that in most cases that we experience there will be anyway a round of communication in exchange of assets to make sure there is consent. So the ability to add in this consent also the proof of asset also as a signature then allow us to generate this relatively simple and general scheme for these use cases. In any case, we can always switch to the type of injective transaction. That's in the cost of having a bit more complexity on how we construct the Sigma protocol, but it's relatively straightforward if we look at ZK Ledger or Zeta. So I will try now to show a bit about how the auditing would look like. So now if we have a cell with commit and some proofs, then if we want an observer to be able to extract these values, we can always have another token and consistency proof to be able to make sure that this token is binding to the same commit, and then the observer be able to extract the same value. Now, this is very relevant to intermediate solution of settlement banking. So if a regulator mandates settlement banking, it means that even though there is a ledger that is distributed and encrypted, it doesn't mean that the asset itself is going to transact in the ledger. So there will be always another step to make sure that the risk is regulated, and it's by another bond, a bank that will be able to actually transact the asset behind the scene. And it can be after one record or many records, but the idea is that you can construct then the ledger in a very simple manner, that you will have just even the tokens from the commit that we have from the broadcaster between the two parties, and then the settlement bank token to be able to extract and make the trading, even without using the proof of asset. So this is relatively straightforward, but very useful practical case to bring ZKProof to financial use case. And now, when we have privacy preserving auditing, then we will look at maybe normal auditing that we will do on homomorphic ledger, for example, asset balance, average, etc. But now when we have confidential assets, then we can do also inter-assets auditing. And that quite easy to rearrange it to be able to provide ratio of the value. So we can do a kind of liquidity proof that relies on Sigma protocol on different two assets that belongs to a certain party. And we can do also rate. We can also proof rate of two transaction or two assets in a transaction. And that will allow us sometimes to also look at traceability, concentration of value in certain transaction or certain assets by proving rates. So these are relatively simple, and you can also look in our paper. And I want to have kind of a conclusive use case that hopefully will show you the reasoning behind this system is for the bond exchange and coupon rate use case. In this case, you will have the debit market where you have a bond issuer that would like to trade with this bond, and there will be some investors that coming in. And for these investors, there will be also maybe custodians and observer, like auditors that will look at this certain set of transactions. And the idea is that there is quite a complex map of what's the privacy requirement for that problem. So the custodian would want to see investor A that is going to operate according to its capital, and custodian B maybe to the investor B. And then the bond issuer would like to see to distribute a coupon rate or interest rate after a year or two, but it wouldn't necessarily need to know what is the distribution of this coupon. And on top of that, you would have a broker that will get some fees and maybe will handle all this transaction. So there will be several requirements for the trust model and the privacy model in this setup. And simply we can generate the exchange bond in one transaction that contains two assets. And that also can include the custodian if needed in order to be observed using another token. And in addition, you can create even coupon rates that will prove that the coupon rate match the interest rate, for example, 10%, without letting even the bond issuer knows which investor gets how much. So that means that the investor would enjoy the privacy for how much they invested in the bond, and the bond issuer would not know the distribution of coupon. As this is kind of one example that we see that you can imagine that in order to construct the privacy without ZKProof would be very problematic and complex, but with ZKProof it can be a very simple ledger after all. Yes, so I think that's from the case of the use cases, and I just want in the last slide to introduce you to the link for the library, and this is an open source library that you can and I'm inviting you to maybe even contribute and maybe see where potential we can include more use cases. And here I'm showing a simple example that's how the performance is going. The idea is that this library is based on Rust implementation of the cryptography primitives. So we're looking at two curves that we implemented, the BN254 and SEX256. They actually relies on style implementation that already existing before, as you might know, bulletproofs and then GoX for the protocols and for the primitives, and bulletproofs is for the generation of the proof. And then on top of that, we created several Sigma protocol in Rust, and later we have an interface to Python for this Rust. So the performance is maintained, and the most maybe relevant fact is that we also have interaction with the smart contracts, and also another implementation of bulletproof verification, if you would like to see. So all of that is in here, and hope you will visit. And also the paper is linked in this link. So happy to discuss later. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. If I will ask people that have follow-up questions to go catch you directly,
yeah, definitely.
If possible. And go.
Okay, is this thing on? Perfect. Okay, and I assume there are some slides that should be coming up at any moment now, I assume. Otherwise, I can do some stand-up, but I don't know how much you will enjoy all of this.
1 second.
You know, free cryptographer enter into a bar. I only know the one about the mathematicians. The one about the cryptographer is computationally hidden.
So maybe while it's starting, give us the overview of what you're going to be talking about.
Okay, yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about this new proof system that we have, which from maybe a slightly biased opinion I find pretty cool. So roughly the replacement for like, okay, perfect. The replacement for a common protocol, which is the Fry protocol, and an improvement on our previous replacement of the Fry protocol, the Stir protocol, which promises to just reduce basically proof size, verification size, and recursion overhead.
So where you will need to tell people to slide the slide next.
Ah, okay. So I cannot use the beautiful pointer.
Maybe I don't know, but let's try.
Okay, I'll let them. Because I couldn't figure out how to use the Google Slides, so this was like my. This PDF was my alternative for this.
No problem.
Okay, so I guess we can start. Okay, so yeah, so this is joint work with Alessandro Chiesa, Elon Yogev, which are both here, and Gal Arnon, which is here with us in spirit, is actually doing very extremely well. It's just not here physically. So where is this proximity testing for Rich-Solomon code? And in fact, the plus over here is that we're not going to be actually proximity testing for Rich-Solomon codes, but actually for something that we're going to be that I call constraint codes, which I'll tell you why you should care about them. So next slide. So let me start with some motivation. Next slide. So we care about constructing IOPs. Now it works? Okay. I don't believe it does. Okay, I'll tell you. Okay, so we want to construct IOPs. Why do we want? What are IOPs? First, they're like these there are these interactive protocols between a prover and a verifier, in which a prover sends you some Oracle strings, and the verifier can make like queries to these strings. And the reason why we want to construct these IOPs is because they help us into constructing succinct arguments. Later on, you can compile them with something called the BCS transform to achieve very efficient arguments. So now it works. Ah, beautiful, amazing. Oh, thank you. Okay. Thank you. No, I have to say I made it hard for the organizer, so this is yes. This was an adversarial talk, funnily enough. So, okay. I like compilers. I think abstraction barriers are very good as a way to think about things. So to construct these IOPs, we're going to be like actually moving things a step back. We're going to be constructing something conceptually simpler. And this is a polynomial IOP. So these are, again, also interactive protocols in which you have prover and verifier, which interact, and the prover sends polynomials, really polynomials to the verifier, which then can query the evaluations of like these polynomials at points of its choosing. Now you want to compile these kind of things into an IOP. And the strategy that you end up doing is that you want, which is very efficient, is to actually use error-correcting code as your building block. So the way that most modern star constructions are done nowadays is by actually using this Reed-Solomon code as a source of redundancy, and then use something which is called the proximity test, which we'll see in the next slide, to check claims of the encoded oracle. So when I compile things, I'll just have my IOP in which the prover runs internally the prover of the polynomial IOP. This gives you a polynomial. You send it over as this Reed-Solomon encoding, which I'll explain what it is later on. And then the verifier will run the verifier of the polynomial IOP, and when the verifier wants to query f at the point z, well, the prover will just give it the actual point. Now, of course, we're not in the business of trusting provers, so we want to keep the prover honest in actually sending a value y, which is consistent with the polynomial it has committed to. So the way that we enforce this consistency by doing this Reed-Solomon proximity test on a virtual function on this quotient. And for this talk, it doesn't really matter what it is, but this is how most of the efficient star constructions are done in practice nowadays. And the argument size of this construction almost directly and almost entirely depends from this proximity test. Okay, what are these proximity tests? Well, so first, let me recall what are Reed-Solomon codes. So Reed-Solomon codes are just evaluation of low-degree polynomials. So I'm taking a polynomial of 2 to the m coefficients, and then I'm writing it down on a domain of size n. And one notion that we're going to be interested about this encoding is the rate. So this is how much larger the evaluation domain in which I'm writing down is compared to the coefficient of the polynomial. So in an IOP for a Reed-Solomon code, what you end up having, you have, again, an interactive protocol between a prover and a verifier. The mode of interaction is the same as an IOP. So the prover is allowed to send these oracle strings, and then the verifier can query them. And additionally, the verifier and the prover have access to this oracle, this f in the sky. And the kind of two functional properties that we want to have is that, first, if this oracle in the sky really is a Reed-Solomon encoding, so really it is the evaluation of a low-degree polynomial, then the verifier will be convinced by this interaction, while later on, if the function is far from Reed-Solomon code, the verifier will only accept with small probability. And this soundness notion, which is not really soundness, this is proximity, is what the IOP proximity takes the name from. So the reason why we have to give this weaker guarantee is because we don't want to read the entire function. So we can only query it at a few places, and the fewer queries that we make, the more efficient our proof system will be. Okay, so we're going to be looking at how to construct this primitive, this IOP proximity, but not exactly the IOP proximity for Reed-Solomon codes. And yes, we also achieve a notion of round-robin soundness, which is required to be able to compile the protocol successfully. So in fact, we're going to be looking at something slightly different, which is this constrained Reed-Solomon test. So recall that in this kind of like blueprint that I gave you before, we are running this Reed-Solomon proximity test. But really, the reason why we want to do this is to show that there's some polynomial that we have committed to, such that it evaluates to y at z. So this is the reason why we're doing it. So conceptually, you can break this. You can break down this proximity test as two steps, really. One is first taking the function and turning it into a function which embeds the constraints inside, and then later on proximity testing this new function, this virtual function. And these are the old slides. And we are the reason why we really care about this proximity test. We care about it for a lot of reasons, but for the purposes of this construction, we want to check this constraint. So this naturally leads to a question like, why are we doing this step in which we have to do two moves? Let's just make the proximity test directly test the constraint. So can we move this constraint checking directly into the IOPP? So we look again at our Rich-Solomon codes, and in this talk we're gonna want to extend the functionality as well. So we want to talk about multilinear polynomials. So I'm just gonna rewrite Rich-Solomon code to be about multilinear polynomial. Roughly, this just ends up evaluating the multilinear polynomial on a funny domain. Don't worry too much about it. But now I'm gonna extend the Rich-Solomon code by adding a constraint on it. So in this case, this constraint is given by these two values, this weight polynomial and the target, which is the value of the constraint. So roughly now my new code contains of is the same as the Rich-Solomon code, but additionally I want some constraint to hold. In this case, these are like sum check constraint because, spoiler alert, is at ZK talk, we're going to do sum check at one point. Not in particular, this is general enough to actually capture the Rich-Solomon codes that we know and love. And in particular, if like this weight polynomial has this particular form, we're actually able to recover multilinear polynomial evaluation, which is something that we actually care deeply about. So this is under our blueprint. We want to construct something for this constrained Rich-Solomon code, which I'll later tell you that ends up like being a good thing. So what are our results? Well, we construct where. So where is exactly an IOPP for this constrained Rich-Solomon code. So it's an IOPP which tackles exactly this problem. So it has, let me tell you, it has some properties that we call query efficiency. In particular, the number of queries in the parameter regime that we care about ends up being exactly of lambda, which is asymptotically optimal for like these kind of IOPPs. In particular, we care of a setting, and these asymptotics assume that the security parameter is much larger than your instance size, and we set this folding parameter to this. I fucked this presentation. To be around log of n. Further, we show that this constrained Rich-Solomon proximity test end up like being a useful notion. So we show a nice soundness compiler that takes any generalized notion of a polynomial IOP, which we call sigma IOP, compiles it with a constrained Rich-Solomon IOPP to get an IOP. And this is an analog to the Rich-Solomon polynomial IOP compiler, which uses quotients. Further, we have an implementation which is decently written for like academic standards. So, doesn't really say much, but it's pretty nice. Okay, so just to compare with previous works, here are like just some slides. Roughly compared to like works as Fry and Basefold, we get like exponential improvement in the query complexity. And compared to work like Stir, which also achieved this exponential improvement in the query complexity, we end up getting a much better like verifier asymptotic complexity. So further, like where acts directly as a replacement for Fry and Stir. This is given by the fact that the constrained Rich-Solomon codes end up like generalizing Rich-Solomon codes. It has the same benefits as Stir over Fry, so the reduced queries and the reduced recursion overhead, and a similar prover time. Additionally, it is a richer proximity test. So while Stir and Fry ended up being very natively about univariate polynomials, like where can be used for multilinear PCSs. So it can be used to compile polynomial IOPs which deal with multilinear polynomials. So it can also be additionally used for these sigma IOPs, which I'm going to be maybe talking at the end, depending on time. And further, the asymptotic improvement in the verifier complexity leads us to a notion which we call superfast verification, which I'm going to be talking next by just showing you the numbers. So the where verifier runs in a few hundred microseconds. So every other verifier known in the literature requires several milliseconds and more. And this is all without compromising on prover time and argument size. So just to give you some numbers, so like as a polynomial commitment scheme for degree 2 to the 24 and 100 bits of security, the prover time is around 3 seconds, the proof size is around 70 kilobytes, and the verifier time is around 300 microseconds. To give you some point of comparison to other things known in the literature, like here I put like every polynomial commitment I could make run on my laptop. I put it there, and like there are other hash-based schemes, like for example Breakdown, Ligero, which are they're not succinct, but and so they have verification which is on the order of seconds, let's say. There's some lattice stuff like Greyhound, which is in order of like 0.1 seconds. Then there are IRATs, PST, and KCG. These are elliptic curve schemes. And they also have around 100 milliseconds, 7 milliseconds, 2 milliseconds, where instead consistently I managed to achieve a verification size of around a millisecond or below. And what I want to point out in this comparison is that like PST and KCG are both schemes using elliptic curve with trusted setup using pairing, while WER inherits some of the features of like hash-based polynomial commitment schemes in that it has no trusted setup, it has a transparent setup, and it is plausibly post-quantum secure in that is the only cryptographic assumption that it requires is the security of hash functions, or really the random oracle model, which we've talked about a bit today. So I don't know how much I will be doing with time, but let me start to diving in some of the techniques of what WER ends up doing. So as a review, we're going to be talking about the fry and stir folding. So this is the core component of basically all IOPPs for Rich-Solomon codes. So we are in the business of trying to reduce the size of problems. And folding is a way that you can take like some, so it's a way which you can take like some code word of some size and try to reduce it. Roughly, these are like some protocol between a prover and a verifier, in which the verifier samples some randomness, and the prover and the randomness will define some fold, which ends up like being, in the honest case, a code word of a dimension which diminishes by 2 to the k. And the way that you can think about it is very similar to an FFT, so you can think of taking the odd and even coefficient of the polynomial and just taking a random linear combination of them. And this fold has a lot of properties, but roughly for soundness, the most important one is that of distance preservation. Namely, if you end up like taking this, if you end up taking a function which is delta far from the code, and then you fold it, then unless with some small probability, the fraction of corrupted entries will not decrease. And this leads from a very beautiful result, which is called the proximity gap for Solomon codes. So this is not enough for WER. So in WER, later on, we will not see because of time, but what you will be wanting, you will want to handle constraints. So we want to test proximity of constraint codes. And we will want to give like this kind of, to fold at the same time both the constraint and the code word. So it turns out that just created agreement in itself is not sufficient, at least in the regime of list decoding where we are like interested on. So we want to introduce something different that is strong enough for our notion. This is mutual correlated agreement. So, okay, suppose that we have m function that we want to test proximity to. Of course, having m function to test is very cumbersome, so we might want to reduce them to a single one. So the way that this is done is via the only trick that we know, which is a random linear combination. So there's a long line of work which tries to decide what a test on f star tells you about the function that you originally randomly linear combined. So if, for example, the final function is close to the code in some like portion, which I put here in green, like the agreement theorem tells you that like all the other function will also be close to a code in some portion. Correlated agreements strengthen this and say like, look, the picture it doesn't look like this. In reality, all the functions end up like agreeing with the code on the same stripe. Of course, if you look at this picture, this is, a bit annoying because you have all the stripes on like one side, but the stripe of the thing that you've tested is on a different stripe. So you might say like, look, there's no reason in the world why this happens. And in the picture that we should really be looking at should be this. So the mutual correlated agreement should be all on the same stripe. And this is what we stated happens. And this can be thought about that taking random linear combination does not create new agreement domains. So why is this notion nice? And I think this we'll see how we do with time. So this the fact that this mutual correlated agreement gives you rise to some very categorical theoretical kind of like interpretations. Roughly, you can think of like taking a list of functions, taking a random linear combination of them, and taking a list around the random linear combination. Well, what mutual correlated agreement tells you is that you can go this way in this diagram, or you can alternatively, sorry, this is the list, or you can alternatively take the list of the interleaved code around the function, and then take the random linear combination of things of the list, and then you arrive at the same stop pod. So this diagram ends up commuting. So this is what it's how you can write it formally. So the way they like to think is that each term in the left-hand side can be explained by terms in the right-hand side. So in the paper, we show that the correlated agreement implies mutual correlated agreement in unique decoding. We do not know whether this holds in general, and in fact, I think it's a very exciting question to work on. But luckily, we're kind of been vindicated in the fact that this notion has been shown to hold for general linear codes up to the 1.5 Johnson bound. So the people are the mutual correlated agreements end up like being at least somewhat of a natural notion for codes. So am I doing for time? Should I wrap up? Are we?
1 minute, thanks.
1 minute, okay. So maybe I'll go with my favorite slide, which is the WER iteration. So WER ends up like being the following protocol. So we remember what we're doing. We want to test a constraint with Solomon code. What we do, we start and we run k rounds of sum check. So this ends up sending sum check polynomials. Then the sum check randomness defines the folding of the function, and the prover sends a re-encoding of G under a different rate, a code of a different rate. So this is on a domain larger than what the fold will be. Then these are claimed to be the same polynomial, but we don't really have, we cannot trust the prover for having sent the same polynomial, so we need to have some consistency in order to hold the prover accountable. And what happens that we do is we end up doing this protocol, which is called a domain shift, which I don't have time to talk about, which ends up making T queries to the original function, and it will return a list of claims on G, the new function. Then these claims end up being batched into a single claim, and then we recurse on this protocol. So this is a very similar structure to stir, but now we're working like in this multilinear world. And quotients that were very successful using stir just do not end up giving you any mileage in the multilinear world because things end up just breaking. So we need new ideas to domain shift, which I will not have time for that, but I have a beautiful slide at the end with an e-print.
Go ahead with the domain shift, and then we move.
Sorry,
to
and
no, it's too,
no. Like, look, I think I'm not a terrible speaker, but I'm not that good.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the sigma IOP, which is.
Yeah, so can I prompt you with in conclusion?
Yes, that's a conclusion slide. So.
Thanks.
There's the e-print. There you can look a lot about the domain shift. I have these full slides up somewhere. But roughly the point I want to make is that WER ends up like giving you a state-of-the-art hash-based argument in terms of argument size, hash complexity, and it has the faster verification of any polynomial commitment scheme, including pre-quantum one, which make use of trusted setup. Furthermore, it enables new construction of a generalization of polynomial IOP, and enables high-soundness compilation for these new sigma IOPs. So this has been my time, and yeah, WER.
So thank you so much. I have one question for you. So we know about steer, we know about WER. Is your bet on evolutions again on these for the the one that will take us for the third millennia, or?
So predicting the future is notoriously hard. So what I will say is that stir, were, fry, they end up like constructing arguments via pattern, which is by taking some information theoretical components like this polynomial IOP and then connecting it with some proximity for some proximity test. Now, proximity test in general, there's a limit to efficient they can be. There are like some error terms which end up like appearing, which kind of limit you to how small the argument size can be. So you can improve on things, but up only to a point. Now, is it so? On that, if you look at it asymptotically, like where is as good as possible. So what you can improve is in constants, but this can be they could be very concrete things. I think I was doing some back of the envelope. There's like a 2x that you can get in argument size probably. You know, now there's a state. Does the state of the argument of the universe allow you to go as low as the limit? That I have no idea. So I'm saying like this is a very exciting area of research, and driving down argument size is due to lead to the most efficient arguments known, and whether you can get better than this from like different techniques rather than just some parameterization, that's a very exciting open question.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.